Greetings, Lore Masters. Tonight, our chronicle covers one of the most tragic and horrifying devolutions in the history of Tamriel, a story that takes us from the gleaming, sun-kissed peaks of the Merethic era down into the suffocating, chitin-infested dark of the Blackreach caverns. We are talking, of course, about the betrayed, the Falmer. It is a tale of genocide, desperation, and a biology twisted by centuries of darkness and poison. Let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive a trip to a farmer hive without a fully levelled sneak skill and a backpack absolutely stuffed with resist poison potions, because those Chaurus do not play fair. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead and drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing just how far these stories travel across our own world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. To understand the monster, we first have to mourn the man, or rather, the mer. When we look at the Falmer today, those hunchbacked, clicking, hissing nightmares stumbling around Gloomreach, it is almost impossible to reconcile them with the ancient snow elves. But the first brutally honest truth about the Falmer is that their spirit didn't break in the dark. It broke on the battlefield, under the bright cold sun of Solstheim, with the death of a single hero. We have to rewind the clock to the late Merethic era. The war between the Atmarans, the ancestors of the Nords, and the Snow Elves was raging. This wasn't just a territorial dispute, it was a war of extinction. But the Snow Elves weren't the primitive goblins we farm for ears and glowing mushrooms today. They were a sophisticated, magically potent civilization that rivaled the High Elves of Somerset Isle in culture, and the Aelids in magical prowess. They had gleaming white cities, intricate pantheons, and a deep connection to the frozen elements of the north. The turning point, the moment the dominoes began to fall toward their inevitable doom, occurred during the Battle of the Moosering. Imagine the scene. The Moosering Mountains on the island of Solstheim. The air is so cold it burns the lungs, filled with the clash of Nordic steel and elven magic. The ground is slick with blood and slush. The Snow Elves are losing. The Atmaran war machine, fueled by Ysgramor's fury, is pushing them back, crushing their lines with the inexorable weight of a glacier. Morale is crumbling. The Snow Elf soldiers are looking at the massive bearded Nords screaming about Sovngarde and realising that this might be the end. And then, amidst the chaos, a figure emerges, the Snow Prince. If you've read the in-game book, Fall of the Snow Prince, usually found collecting dust on a shelf in the Dragonborn DLC or tucked away in a bandit chieftain's chest, you know the reverence with which even his enemies spoke of him. He wasn't just a general, he was the physical embodiment of their race's hope. He rode into battle on a white steed, wielding a spear of unknown, shimmering metal. His armour was blindingly radiant, described as encompassing the very brilliance of the sun on fresh snow. For a moment, the tide turned. The Snow Prince was a whirlwind. He wasn't just killing Atmarans, he was dancing through them. The text describes him moving like a blizzard, his spear snapping Nordic blades and piercing heavy iron armour as if it were parchment. The Nords, who respect strength above all else, were terrified. They were facing something superior, something divine. The Snow Elves rallied. You can imagine the sudden surge of hope, the cheers rising from the elven ranks as their prince decimated the vanguard of the 500 companions. They thought they could win. They thought they could save their civilization. And then tragedy struck. Not by a grand spell or a legendary duel with Ysgramor himself, but by a fluke of war, a cruel, random roll of the cosmic dice. The Snow Prince killed a warrior named Joffrior. As she fell, her 12-year-old daughter, Fina, watched from the sidelines, likely having joined the baggage train or refusing to leave her mother's side. In a blind rage, fueled by grief and the terrifying adrenaline of a child watching their world end, Fina picked up her mother's sword. Now, consider the absurdity of this. The Snow Prince is an ancient master warrior. He has likely trained for centuries. He is swirling with magical protections and wearing armour forged by master smiths. Fina is a child. She throws the sword. Just a desperate, clumsy heave. It struck him. The blade found a gap in that radiant armour, piercing his chest. The Snow Prince, the saviour of the Elves, the most beautiful and deadly warrior of his age, fell dead from his horse, killed by a grieving child. The battlefield went silent. You can picture it. The sudden cessation of noise. The Nords were stunned. The Snow Elves were shattered. In that singular moment, the spirit of the Snow Elves evaporated. They didn't just lose a commander, they lost the proof that they were favoured by the gods. If their perfect champion could be felled by a Nord child, what chance did the rest of them have? Panic set in. The organised, disciplined elven army dissolved into a terrified rabble. They broke ranks and fled, leading to a slaughter that stained the snow red for miles. This was the true death of the Snow Elf civilization. Everything that happened afterward, the flight underground, the deal with the Dwemer, the blindness, was just the rotting of the corpse. The soul died there, in the Moostring. There is a fascinating, obscure lore tidbit regarding the aftermath of this battle that often gets overlooked by players rushing to get their Stalrim armour. The Nords, despite their burning hatred for the Elves, a hatred that fueled a genocide, did not desecrate the Snow Prince's body. Ysgramor's people were brutal, yes, but they were culturally bound by a deep respect for martial prowess. They took the body of the Snow Prince, wrapped it in fine silks, and buried him in a barrow on Solstheim, Yolgir Barrow. They buried him with his armour and his spear. They surrounded him with treasures. They treated this enemy combatant, this Myr, with the honours of a Nord chieftain. It's a haunting juxtaposition. They wiped out his people, but they built a monument to him. This has led to a long-standing community debate and fan theory about the nature of the Snow Prince himself. Some lore enthusiasts argue that the respect shown to him suggests he might have had some Atmaran blood, or that the Nords recognised him as a dragon of the north in spirit, if not in biology. Others speculate that the Snow Prince wasn't just a rank, that he was a specific, unique subspecies of Snow Elf, perhaps a throwback to the old Elnofe, which is why he was so much taller and more radiant than his kin. If you visit his barrow in the Blood Moon expansion of Morrowind or see his armour in Skyrim, you'll notice the equipment is distinct, ancient, and undeniably powerful. Whatever he was, his death taught the Snow Elves a brutal lesson. The surface world was no longer theirs. The sun, which glittered so beautifully off the prince's armour, had betrayed them. It offered them no protection. And so, broken, leaderless, and hunted, the survivors began to look for a place where the Nords and their steel could not reach them. They looked down. This psychological break is crucial to understanding the Falmer. They didn't go to the Dwemer as equals negotiating a treaty. They went as refugees who had already seen their gods fail them. They were a traumatized people, suffering from a collective PTSD that made them vulnerable to the worst kind of exploitation. In the game, we usually just see the Falmer as enemies to be cleared out of a dungeon. We see a red dot on the compass. We sneak, we shoot, we loot. But pause for a second next time you see a Falmer Shadowmaster. Remember that his ancestors were the ones who stood in the snow at Moostring. They were the ones who watched their prince fall and felt the cold hand of extinction grip their hearts. The creature you are fighting is the result of that trauma festering for thousands of years. The fall of the Snow Prince was the first domino. It removed the leadership and the hope that might have allowed the Snow Elves to mount a resistance or flee to other lands like the High Rock or Cyrodiil. Instead, leaderless and terrified, they were corralled. They were pushed into the corners of Skyrim, into the caves and the deep places. The narrative of the Snow Prince also serves as a stark reminder of the brutality of the Nords. We love our Nords in Skyrim. Skyrim belongs to the Nords, and all that. But let's be real. The Upmoran Return was a campaign of absolute annihilation. The death of the prince didn't satiate their bloodlust. It accelerated it. With the elven hero gone, the Nords realised the elves were mortal, weak and breakable. The respect they showed the prince's corpse was the final act of chivalry before the butchery began in earnest. So, the Snow Elves ran. They ran from the wind, they ran from the sky, and they ran from the memory of that child soldier Finna standing over their fallen god. They ran until they hit the stone foundations of the mountains, and then they kept going, blindly hoping that the race of logic and steam dwelling beneath the earth would be kinder than the race of iron and shout dwelling upon it. Spoiler alert, they weren't. But before we descend into the madness of the Dwemer Pact, we have to look at the immediate aftermath of the prince's death on the surface, because the war didn't end instantly. it transitioned into something far darker. The shattering of morale at Mosring led to the Night of Tears and the subsequent systematic hunting of the Elves. The Snow Prince's fall was the signal fire that told Ysgramor, finish it. And that leads us to the grim reality of what the Nords actually did next. It wasn't just a war anymore, it was a pest control operation. History, as the saying goes, is written by the victors, and in Skyrim, history is written in the blood of Elves, carved into stone tablets by illiterate Nords, and then shouted at you by a guy in Whiterun who thinks he's the Dragonborn. When we read the plaques in Windhelm or listen to the bards sing the Age of Aggression, we get a very specific narrative. The noble Atmarans came in peace, the treacherous Snow Elves slaughtered them in their sleep at Sarthol, and Ysgramor returned to serve justice. But if we peel back the layers of Nord propaganda and look at the brutally honest truth, what Ysgramor launched wasn't a war. It wasn't a skirmish. It was a systematic, relentless, continent-spanning extermination order. The second truth we have to swallow is that the Night of Tears, the event that started it all, is a lot more complicated than the Nords admit. According to the standard Imperial Library, the Snow Elves grew jealous of the humans' rapid breeding rates, which, let's be honest, is a weird thing to start a war over, and decided to wipe out the colony of Sarthol. They killed everyone except Ysgramor and his two sons, Ingol and Ilgar, who fled back to Atmora. However, any player who has slogged through the College of Winterhold questline knows the real reason. Buried deep within the ruins of Sarthol, Tolfdir and the Dragonborn uncover the Eye of Magnus. This unstable, reality-warping artifact of immense power was buried there. The core in-game fact here is undeniable. The Snow Elves didn't attack Sarthol because they hated human babies. They attacked because the Nords had found a magical nuke and were poking it with sticks. The Elves, being magically sophisticated, likely sensed the energy surge and launched a preemptive strike to secure the artifact before the humans accidentally unmade existence. It doesn't justify the slaughter of civilians, but it changes the context from senseless malice to desperate containment. But nuance doesn't matter to a Nord with an axe. Ysgramor didn't care about magical containment protocols, he cared about revenge. When he returned from Atmora with the 500 companions, he wasn't looking to retake territory, he was looking to erase a species. Let's talk about the 500 companions for a second. In Nord folklore, they are heroes. In reality, they were a death squad. These weren't your average city guards complaining about stolen sweet rolls. These were the legendary heroes of old, names like Jeek of the River and the great enchanter Azadal. They carved a path of destruction through Skyrim that would make a Daedric prince blush. The text, Songs of the Return, details their exploits, and if you actually read the lyrics, it's basically a laundry list of war crimes set to a catchy tune. They burned villages, they hunted down fleeing refugees, and they didn't stop until the snow ran red. The symbol of this genocide is, of course, Wuthrad. You've held it. You've probably swung it. It's that massive battle axe you reforged during the Companion's questline, and what is its unique enchantment? Does more damage to elves. That's it. It's not flaming, it's not freezing. It is conceptually designed to be racist. Ysgramor hated elves so much that his weapon manifests that hatred as physical trauma. That is the level of animosity the Snow Elves were dealing with. They were fighting an enemy whose very legendary artifacts were engineered to exterminate them more efficiently. This leads us to a fascinating obscure lore tidbit involving the great enchanter Azadal. We know him from the Dragonborn DLC as a dragon priest, but back in the Merethic era, he was a man driven by grief. He had been away learning elven magic when Sarthol was sacked. He came home to find his wife and child dead in the ruins. His response? He joined the 500 companions and used the elves' own magic against them. The lore suggests that Azadal is the one who enchanted the Nords' weapons to be so devastatingly effective against elven armour and physiology. The tragedy of the Snow Elves is that their own magical knowledge was weaponized against them by a grieving father who had nothing left to lose. As the campaign pressed on, the war devolved into a hunt. The Snow Elves were pushed out of the cities, then they were pushed out of the valleys, then they were pushed out of the forests. The Nords were relentless. This wasn't a conquest where the victors accept the surrender of the defeated and integrate them as a lower caste. The Nords didn't want slaves, they wanted empty land. There is a grim community debate that often pops up on the forums regarding the morality of the Atmarans. Many fans argue that Ysgramor is the true villain of the Elder Scrolls history. If the Snow Elves attacked Sarthol to stop a magical catastrophe involving the Eye of Magnus, then Ysgramor's genocide is even more horrific. He wiped out the people trying to save the world. It frames the entire human history of Skyrim on a foundation of misunderstanding and disproportionate retribution. It's the Ender's Game scenario of Tamriel, total annihilation of an alien culture because communication broke down. Imagine being a snow elf in this era. The Snow Prince is dead. Your magic is failing against Nord steel. Every time you try to establish a defensive line, a screaming bearded maniac with a two-handed axe smashes through it. You retreat to the high peaks, the glacial crevice, the Forgotten Vale. But the Nords keep coming. They are acclimated to the cold just as well as you are. There is no sanctuary in the snow. The psychological toll this took on the Snow Elves cannot be overstated. They went from being the masters of Skyrim, elegant, proud, pious worshippers of Auriel, to hunted animals. This degradation of their status is essential to understanding why they eventually accepted the Dwemer's offer. You don't walk into a tiger's den unless a dragon is chasing you. The Nords were the dragon. We also have to consider the sheer scale of the displacement. We find Snow Elf ruins all over Skyrim, but they are almost always thoroughly erased or built over by Nords. The Palace of the Kings in Windhelm. Some theories suggest its foundations might have been elven, before Ysgramor claimed the site to build his capital, literally building his throne on the bones of his enemies. The Nords were thorough. They didn't just kill the elves. They erased their culture. They smashed the statues of Auriel. They burned the libraries. They toppled the spires. This erasure was so complete that by the Fourth Era, the time of Skyrim, most people don't even believe the Snow Elves were real people. They think Falmer is just a name for goblin men. The Nords succeeded in not just killing the bodies, but killing the memory of the civilization. That is a special kind of vengeance. It's the kind that says, you will not only die, but it will be as if you never existed at all. And let's be honest, the Nords enjoyed it. The songs of the return aren't somber dirges, they are drinking songs. They celebrated the cleansing. This cultural attitude persists in the companions of today. When you join them, you're joining a guild that traces its lineage back to this genocide. Sure, Farkas is a lovable oaf and Ayla is, well, Ayla, but the organisation's roots are soaked in elven blood. The honour they speak of was forged in the fires of Sarthol and tempered in the massacre of the Snow Elves. So the Snow Elves were running out of options. The surface world had become a kill box. The mountains were crawling with hunting parties. The lowlands were occupied by hostile settlements. They had their backs against the wall, and the wall was made of solid rock. But wait, there was a door in that rock. The Snow Elves knew of their cousins, the Dwemer, Deep Elves. The Dwemer were already established underground, living in their brass cities, tinkering with tonal architecture and ignoring the gods. The Snow Elves and the Dwemer had never been particularly close. Philosophically, they were opposites. The Snow Elves worshipped the gods. The Dwemer mocked them. The Snow Elves loved nature. The Dwemer sought to mechanize it. But they were both Mer. They were kin, in a distant sense. Desperation makes for strange bedfellows. As Ysgramor's forces closed in for the final kill, the Snow Elves sent emissaries deep into the earth. They pleaded for sanctuary. They begged for asylum. They asked their underground cousins to open the gates of Blackreach and let them in, just until the Nords calmed down, just until they could regroup. It was a plea born of absolute terror. They looked at the Nords and saw death. They looked at the Dwemer and saw, well, they weren't sure what they saw. Cold, logical, brass-masked faces. But surely even the stoic Dwemer wouldn't turn away their own flesh and blood in the face of extinction. Surely the bonds of elven heritage meant something. The Dwemer agreed. They opened the great bronze doors. They beckoned the refugees inside. Come, they said, we will protect you. The Nords cannot reach you here. You will be safe. The Snow Elves streamed underground by the thousands. Men, women, children, carrying whatever scraps of their culture they could save. They left the sun behind. They left the sky behind. They heard the heavy thud of the Dwemer doors sealing shut, muffling the war cries of the Nords outside. They breathed a sigh of relief. They were safe. The genocide was over. But as their eyes adjusted to the dim glow of the subterranean geodes and the hiss of steam pipes, the Snow Elves realized something was wrong. The Dwemer weren't offering hospitality. They were offering a transaction, and the price for safety wasn't gold or magic or labor. The price was their sight. The price was their minds. The price was their very souls. The Nords wanted to kill them. The Dwemer wanted to change them. And as we transition to the next chapter of this nightmare, we have to acknowledge that while Ysgramor broke their bodies, it was the Dwemer who would break their spirit. The Nords were a hurricane. The Dwemer were a slow-acting poison. And the Snow Elves, fleeing the wolf, had just run straight into the maw of the darker, deeper beast. So we have the Snow Elves, refugees in their own land, huddled before the massive steam-hissing gates of the Dwemer cities. They've escaped the Nords' axes, but they've walked into a trap so cold and calculated it makes a Daedric prince look like a philanthropist. This brings us to the third brutally honest truth. The pact with the Dwemer was never about sanctuary. It was about science. To the Deep Elves, their desperate cousins weren't guests, they were raw materials. Let's get real for a moment. If your neighbour, who is known for building torture robots and debating gods out of existence, offers you a safe room in his basement, but demands you drink a weird glowing smoothie first, you say no. But the Snow Elves didn't have the luxury of no. Above them was Ysgramor. Below them was the Dwemer. It was a choice between immediate death and uncertain survival. They chose survival. And the Dwemer, being the most logical sociopaths in Tamrielic history, made sure to extract maximum value from that choice. The Dwemer culture is defined by logic, reason, and a complete lack of empathy. They didn't worship gods, they studied them to see how they worked. They viewed the world as a machine to be disassembled and understood. So, when thousands of desperate, magically gifted elves showed up at their doorstep, the Dwemer didn't see a humanitarian crisis. They saw a labour force, but not just any labour force, a labour force that needed to be pacified, controlled, and stripped of the ability to rebel. The Pact, as it's loosely called, was simple on paper. The Dwemer would provide the Snow Elves with a safe haven underground, protecting them from the Nords. In exchange, the Snow Elves had to consume a specific toxic fungus. The Dwemer claimed it was necessary for their acclimation to the underground environment, or perhaps part of a ritual. The exact lie they told is lost to history, but we know the Snow Elves bought it. They trusted their kin. This wasn't just a handshake deal, it was a mass poisoning. The fungus wasn't a nutritional supplement, it was a mutagen. Here is the core in-game fact that chills the blood. We know exactly where this betrayal was codified. In the ruins of Nchun Zel, under Markarth, and other Dwemer strongholds, we find the stone tablets that detail this arrangement. The translations provided by Caltelmo, that frantic scholar in Markarth who loves Dwemer artifacts more than he loves fresh air, reveal the cold, transactional nature of it. The Dwemer didn't even bother to hide their intent in the fine print. They essentially said, "Eat this, go blind, and serve us, or go back outside and die." The treachery here is multi-layered. The Snow Elves were a proud race. To reduce them to servitude required more than chains, it required breaking their biology. The Dwemer needed to ensure that this new workforce couldn't navigate the complex machinery of the cities, couldn't read the schematics, and couldn't look their masters in the eye. Blindness was the perfect shackle. It was permanent, it was debilitating, and it was inheritable. This leads us to a disturbing, obscure lore tidbit. There is a specific toxic fungus found in Blackreach. The glowing mushroom is the common variant we see, but the Dwemer likely cultivated a far more potent, concentrated strain. Some alchemical theories in the community suggest that the toxin didn't just target the eyes. It targeted the pineal gland, the third eye often associated with magical perception in Elder Scrolls lore. By blinding them physically and spiritually, the Dwemer didn't just make them clumsy. They severed their connection to Auriel. They cut them off from their god. Imagine the horror of those first weeks. The Snow Elves eat the fungus. Their vision starts to blur. They panic. They go to the Dwemer healers, who simply nod and say, "It is part of the process." The darkness closes in. Parents go blind while holding their children. Warriors who once sniped birds from the sky can't find their own mouths to eat. And through it all, the grinding of the Dwemer gears continues, indifferent and rhythmic. Community debates often flare up around the Dwemer's motivation. Why blind them? Why not just use magical slave collars? The prevailing theory is that the Dwemer wanted to create a subspecies that was biologically dependent on them. By removing sight, the Falmer, as they were beginning to become, became reliant on the acoustic signals and smell-based cues of the underground, an environment the Dwemer controlled completely. It was eugenics on a massive scale. The Dwemer were trying to breed a perfect servant caste, one that literally could not envision a world outside the deep. This marks the transition from snow elf to the betrayed. The Dwemer didn't just enslave them, they betrayed the fundamental trust between sentient beings. In the lore, this is often cited as the primary reason for the Dwemer's eventual disappearance. Cosmic karma, perhaps. But while the Dwemer were still there, they were cruel masters. We see evidence of this cruelty in the layout of Dwemer ruins. Ever notice how the Falmer huts are always located in the dampest, darkest, most miserable corners of the ruins? Near the water pumps, the sewage lines, the heat exhaust vents, they were kept like livestock. The Dwemer lived in the golden halls above, the Falmer lived in the muck below, and the snow elves let it happen. Not because they were weak, but because the alternative was extinction. This is the tragedy that makes the Falmer so compelling. Every click, every hiss you hear in a dungeon is the echo of a choice made by a desperate refugee thousands of years ago. I will give up my eyes so my children can live. They just didn't realize their children would live as monsters. There is a particularly grim irony in the fact that the snow elves sought refuge with the Dwemer because the Dwemer were civilized. The Nords were considered barbarians, axe-wielding savages. The Dwemer were scientists, architects, philosophers. Yet the barbarians would have just killed them. The civilized scholars did something far worse. It forces us to ask, what is true savagery? Is it the heat of passion on a battlefield, or the cold calculation of a laboratory? If you explore the Dwemer ruins of Kagrenzel, there is a trap that drops you down a massive shaft into a deep underground lake. It's a terrifying fall. Surviving it feels like a miracle. But think about it from a snow elf perspective. They were dropped into the dark, metaphorically and literally. They fell from the grace of the surface world into the abyss, and there was no one to catch them. The relationship wasn't static either. Over centuries, the Dwemer likely experimented further. We find torture devices in Dwemer ruins that don't seem designed for interrogation, but for testing limits. How much pain can a Falmer withstand? How much weight can they carry? How little food do they need? The Dwemer kept meticulous notes, I'm sure. Somewhere in a lexicon we haven't decoded yet, there is probably a spreadsheet optimizing Falmer calorie intake versus ore output. This toxic pact fundamentally changed the trajectory of life on Tamriel. It created a new species. The Falmer aren't just blind elves, they're a distinct evolutionary offshoot forged in toxicity. And the Dwemer, in their arrogance, thought they had solved the refugee problem. They had acquired a workforce and eliminated a potential rival. But the Dwemer made a classic villain mistake. They underestimated the resilience of their victims. They took away the Falmer's sight, but they couldn't take away their rage. In fact, by confining them to the dark, by forcing them to rely on hearing and smell, they were inadvertently training them. They were creating a predator perfectly adapted to the environment the Dwemer lived in. So the stage was set. The snow elves were blind. They were enslaved. They were changing. The glowing mushrooms were doing their work, rewriting the genetic code of a once proud race. But the transformation wasn't just physical, it was destroying the mind. And that brings us to the specific mechanism of their downfall, the fungus itself. It wasn't just poison, it was a tool of complete biological rewiring. The most terrifying weapon in the history of Skyrim wasn't a sword, a shout, or a siege engine, it was a salad. Well, a fungal slurry to be precise. When we talk about the betrayal of the snow elves, it's easy to think of it in abstract terms, a treaty broken, a promise unkept. But the reality is far more visceral. It was a dietary requirement. The Dwemer didn't just blind the snow elves with magic or hot pokers, they forced them to ingest their own destruction, bite by bite, meal by meal, until the poison was woven into their very DNA. Let's look at the mechanics of this. We all know the glowing mushroom item in Skyrim. You find them growing on cave walls, you mix them with blisterwort to make fortify smithing potions so you can break the game economy, and make a bow that does 1,000,000 damage. They seem harmless, pretty even. They provide that nice bioluminescent ambience in Blackreach. But for the snow elves, these fungi were the agents of their unmaking. Knight-Paladin Gelabor, the last known uncorrupted snow elf we meet in the Dawnguard DLC, gives us the core in-game fact that anchors this horror. He explicitly states that the blinding wasn't an accident or a side effect of living underground. It was the price of admission. The Dwemer forced their wards to consume a toxic fungus which rendered them blind. It's a chillingly simple sentence. Imagine the logistics of this. The Snow Elves are starving. They are refugees. The Dwemer present them with this food source, likely the only food source available in the deep subterranean cities. It probably didn't taste like poison. The Dwemer were master alchemists. They would have masked the bitterness. Maybe it tasted earthy, rich, perhaps even sweet. The Snow Elves ate it because they had to. They fed it to their children because the alternative was watching them starve. The blindness likely didn't happen overnight. If it had been instant, there would have been a revolt immediately. No, the Dwemer were smarter than that. It was likely a gradual dimming, a fog rolling in at the edges of their vision. First, the sharp details of the brass pipes blurred. Then, the faces of their loved ones became indistinct. Then, the bioluminescence of the geodes faded to a dull grey. By the time they realised what was happening, that the darkness wasn't just the cave, but their eyes, it was too late. The toxin had already saturated their systems. There is a disturbing obscure lore tidbit regarding the nature of this toxin. In the game, you can harvest Falmer ear as an alchemical ingredient. It's grotesque, sure, you're literally slicing ears off corpses, but look at the effects. One of the primary effects of the Falmer ear ingredient is damage health. Another is frenzy. This suggests that the physiological changes caused by the fungus didn't just target the optical nerves. It saturated their entire flesh with toxicity and aggression. The mushroom didn't just take their sight, it marinating them in madness. The Dwemer were essentially pickling the Snow Elves in a rage-inducing, nerve-deadening brine while they were still alive. We also have to consider the glowing mushroom itself. In the real world, bioluminescence in fungi is often a warning sign or a way to attract insects. In the Elder Scrolls universe, light is often tied to magicka. The Dwemer, who manipulated tonal architecture and magical energies, likely engineered these mushrooms. They weren't just picking toadstools off the floor. These were likely GMOs, genetically modified organisms of the Merethic era. The horror of this forced fungal blindness reaches its peak when we think about the children. The first generation of refugees chose to eat the fungus under duress, but the second generation, the babies born in Chuanzel or Alfdand, they were weaned on poison. They never saw the sun. They never saw their mothers' faces. They were born into a world where eating the thing that crippled them was the only way to survive. This created a biological dependency. The Dwemer ensured that the Snow Elves couldn't just leave and get better. The toxin became a metabolic necessity. If they stopped eating it, they might have died. Or perhaps the withdrawal symptoms were so agony-inducing that they clawed at the walls until they were fed again. It's the ultimate control method. Make the slave addicted to the chains. There is a prevalent fan theory in the lore community that suggests the fungus did more than just blind them physically. Some argue that the fungus severed their connection to the old ways and the magical currents of Aetherius. In the Elder Scrolls, sight is often metaphysical. To see is to understand. By blinding them, the Dwemer might have been trying to sever the Snow Elves' connection to Auriel. If you can't see the light of the sun, can you still worship it? If you can't look up, do the gods still hear you? The theory posits that the blindness was a spiritual lobotomy designed to make them more like the Dwemer, godless, pragmatic, and focused only on the material world. But the Dwemer miscalculated. They wanted workers who couldn't see the exit. What they got were monsters who didn't need to see the exit, because they were becoming the masters of the dark. The physical transformation caused by the fungus is evident in the Falmer we fight today. Look at their faces, if you can stomach it without zooming out. Their eyes aren't just milky, they're often completely gone or vestigial slits. The facial structure has warped. The nose has receded into a bat-like snout, perfect for echolocation and scent detection. This wasn't natural selection over millions of years. This was hyper-accelerated mutation driven by the high-dosage fungal diet. The fungus rewrote their anatomy to fit the Dwemer's specifications: high sensory input for sound and smell, zero reliance on light. It's also worth noting the cruelty of the glowing aspect. The caves of Blackreach are filled with glowing mushrooms, glowing geodes, glowing mineral veins. It's actually quite bright down there. The Dwemer lived in a world of illumination. By blinding the Falmer, they created a caste system based on light. The masters could appreciate the beauty of the subterranean world. The slaves were locked in eternal night, even while standing next to a light source. It's a psychological torture tactic to be bathed in light and see only darkness. And let's be honest, the fact that the Dragonborn can just walk into a cave, pick these mushrooms, and eat them for a tiny bit of health is a hilarious bit of gameplay dissonance. Oh look, the historic gene warfare agent that destroyed a civilization. Crunch. But maybe the strain has weakened over the eras. Or maybe the Dragonborn's stomach is just made of cast iron, which, considering we eat 40 wheels of cheese in mid-combat, is likely. However, for the Snow Elves, the fungus was the end of their identity. It stripped them of their defining feature. Elves are known for their keen eyes. Think of Legolas. Think of the Archers of Alinor. The Snow Elves were hunters. Vision was their primary interface with the world. Taking that away was a specific, targeted depowering. It would be like cutting the tongues out of the Greybeards or breaking the hands of the Orcs. This blindness also forced a change in their combat style and architecture. We will get to the architecture later, but think about how they fight. They don't aim, they spray, they use poison, they use Chaurus, they rely on overwhelming their prey. This all stems from that initial loss. The fungus forced them to abandon the elegant spearwork of the Snow Prince and adopt the frantic, hacking, poison-drenched style of the Falmer. The tragedy is compounded when you find the statue of the Snow Prince or the shrine of Auriel in the Forgotten Vale. The imagery is all about light, sunbursts, gleaming armour, rays of light. The Snow Elves were a solar culture. The fungus was the anti-sun. It was the physical manifestation of the Dwemer's nihilism. So the Snow Elves sat in the dark, chewing on the very thing that was erasing them, listening to the hum of the Dwemer machines. They could feel their eyes failing, they could feel their bodies changing, and they could do nothing. The trap had snapped shut. The Nords had the surface, the Dwemer had the deep, and the Snow Elves had nothing but the poison on their plates. But as the lights went out, something else began to happen. As the windows of the eyes closed, the doors of the soul began to rot. The fungus didn't just stop at the optic nerve, it went deeper. It began to erode the very essence of what made them people, and that brings us to the most heartbreaking gameplay mechanic associated with the Falmer, the classification of their souls. Because somewhere in the darkness they stopped being Mer and started being something else. We need to talk about your inventory. Specifically that rattling bag of soul gems you're carrying around, probably right next to 30 pounds of dragon bones and a stolen sweet roll. In the world of the Elder Scrolls, the soul is not an abstract concept debated by philosophers over wine. It is a tangible, measurable, and highly exploitable resource. It is a battery. And this brings us to the fifth, and perhaps most spiritually devastating, brutally honest truth about the Falmer. The universe itself no longer recognizes them as people. This isn't just poetic sadness. This is a hard-coded gameplay mechanic that reveals a terrifying metaphysical reality. In Skyrim, the rules of soul trapping are rigid. You have your standard soul gems, petty, lesser, common, greater, and grand. These are white soul gems. They are designed to hold the essences of creatures: mud crabs, wolves, bears, trolls, mammoths. Basically, anything that runs on instinct and doesn't pay taxes. Then you have the black soul gems. These are rare, illicit, and often associated with necromancy. They are the only vessels capable of holding the black souls of sentient beings: men, Mer, Argonians, and Khajiit. When you kill a bandit chief who has been murdering travellers for decades, you need a black soul gem to trap his spirit. He is a monster in behaviour, but the cosmos recognises him as a sentient being with a divine spark, protected by the laws of Arche. When you kill a high elf wizard who wants to unmake reality, you need a black soul gem. Even the most depraved, evil, or insane NPC in the game requires a black soul gem because fundamentally they are a person. But when you kill a Falmer, even a Falmer Shadowmaster, a being capable of casting complex destruction magic, utilising tactical stealth, and commanding minions, you can trap his soul in a standard Grand Soul gem, or a common one depending on his level. Let's let that sink in. The game engine, which acts as the impartial arbiter of the universe's physics, classifies the Falmer as creatures, not NPCs, not Mer. They are categorised alongside the Skeevers and the Frostbite Spiders. This is the erosion of the soul. The devolution caused by the Dwemer's toxic fungus and centuries of darkness didn't just twist their bodies, it stripped away their metaphysical status. It scrubbed the humanity or mermanity from their spirits. In the eyes of the gods, or at least in the eyes of the magical laws that govern Nirn, a Falmer is no longer an elf. It is an animal. This leads us to a core in-game fact that players often overlook while frantically recharging their enchanted swords. The distinction between black and white souls is generally attributed to the protection of Arche, the god of the cycle of life and death. Arche's blessing is what prevents the souls of sentient races from being easily trapped in common gems. It's a divine firewall. The fact that Falmer souls are white suggests that Arche has turned his back on them. Or perhaps more tragically, they have devolved so far that Arche's blessing can no longer find purchase on their spirits. They have slipped out of the cycle of civilization and into the cycle of the food chain. There is an obscure lore tidbit that deepens this horror. In the book, The Consecrations of Arche, it is implied that the protection of the soul is a covenant. It requires a certain level of consciousness, a recognition of self. The Falmer's classification as white souls implies that despite their ability to craft weapons and use magic, they lack the AE, the conscious, individualistic self that defines the higher races. They have retained the intelligence to kill, but lost the spark that makes them individuals. They are a hive mind, a collective of instincts wearing the skin of elves. This generates a massive ethical debate within the lore community. Are the Falmer truly gone? Is the person inside the monster dead or just buried? If they are just animals, then killing them is no different than hunting deer. It's pest control. But if they are still Mer, then every dungeon delve is a massacre of a sentient indigenous population. The gameplay mechanics suggest the animal theory is correct, but the visual storytelling fights against it. We see Falmer wearing jewellery. We see them utilising domesticated Chaurus. We see them casting healing spells on each other. Animals don't do that. Animals don't build gates or craft poisons. The Falmer occupy this horrific liminal space. Too smart to be beasts, too broken to be people. They are the uncanny valley of souls. And let's be honest, we, the players, are complicit in this final indignity. Think about it. You sneak into a Falmer hive, you kill a Falmer gloomlurker, you trap his soul, and then what do you do with it? You use it to recharge your staff of fireballs, or you use it to enchant a pair of boots so you can carry more cheese. You're taking the shredded remains of an ancient, tragic snow elf spirit, a being whose ancestors built the Chantry of Auriel, and you are turning it into an AA battery for your loot-hoarding addiction. It is the ultimate objectification. The Dwemer started the process by treating them as labour units. The Dragonborn finishes it by treating them as fuel. This spiritual erosion explains why negotiation is impossible. In Skyrim, you can sometimes calm a bandit, you can intimidate a guard, you can persuade a Jarl, but you cannot talk to a Falmer. There is no dialogue tree, there is no persuade check. The bridge of communication has been burned not just by language barriers, but by a fundamental incompatibility of souls. You're a black soul entity trying to converse with a white soul entity. You might as well try to debate philosophy with a bear. However, there is a glimmer of contradiction here, a flicker of light in the black soul gem debate. We have to consider the existence of the betrayed's magic. The Falmer still use magic. Magic in the Elder Scrolls usually requires intelligence and willpower. It draws from Aetherius. If their souls were truly degraded to the level of a mud crab, how could they channel the energies of destruction and restoration? Some fans theorize that the white soul classification is actually a mercy. If they had black souls, they would be subject to the torments of the Daedric princes or the politics of the afterlife. By becoming animals, perhaps they are spared the judgment of the gods. When a Falmer dies, maybe its energy just recycles into the dreams leave, washed clean of the pain of its existence, purely because it lacks the ego to hold on to the trauma. It's a grim comfort, but it's better than the alternative, that they are sentient beings trapped in a nightmare they cannot wake up from, abandoned by Arche and hunted by heroes. The tragedy is highlighted when we look at Knight-Paladin Gelebor again. He stands in the pristine Forgotten Vale, a relic of the Black Soul era. He looks at his twisted brethren and calls them the betrayed. He pities them. He believes there might be a path back for them, a way to cure the condition. But the soul gem mechanic argues against him. It suggests the change is immutable. You can heal a disease, you can cure a poison, but can you regrow a soul? Can you turn a white soul back into a black soul? This spiritual devolution also explains their absolute fearlessness, or rather, their rabid aggression. Animals fight for territory, food, or defense. The Falmer fight with a hate that feels personal, yet the soul mechanics suggest it's instinctual. It's a paradox. They hate like men, but they die like beasts. Furthermore, consider the implications for the afterlife. Nords go to Sovngarde, Dark Elves go to the Ancestors. Where do Falmer go? If they are white souls, they don't have an afterlife. They just dissipate. The culture of the Snow Elves, their history, their personal memories, it all evaporates the moment you land that killing blow. There is no Hall of Valor for the Falmer. There is only the void, or the enchantment on your dagger. This truth is the most depressing because it signifies the total victory of the Dwemer. The Dwemer were tonal architects. They wanted to refute the gods and escape the laws of reality. By twisting the Snow Elves into soulless monsters, they essentially created a race that proves the Dwemer worldview, that life is just mechanics, that the soul is mutable and ultimately meaningless. They took a pious, God-fearing people and turned them into biological machines. So, the next time you cast Soul Trap on a Falmer, pause for a microsecond. Watch the purple energy swirl from their body into your gem. You aren't just capturing an enemy's power, you're witnessing the final evidence of a crime committed thousands of years ago. You're holding a receipt that says, this being has been evicted from the laws of humanity. But if their souls are gone, or at least reduced to animal instinct, what drives them? What fills the void where the divine spark used to be? If they aren't building temples to Auriel anymore, what are they building? The answer lies in the dark, sticky, clicking reality of their hives. Deprived of sight and stripped of their higher spirits, the Falmer turned to the only senses they had left: touch and smell. And they began to build a world based not on light and stone, but on chitin and flesh. They stopped being architects of marble and became architects of agony. You know exactly when you've crossed the line. You're exploring a Dwemer ruin, admiring the cold geometric perfection of the brass pipes and the rhythmic thrum of the steam pistons. Everything is right angles, metal and math, and then you turn a corner and the world changes. The metal disappears, replaced by something organic, sharp and disturbingly warm. You see stakes made of jagged chitin. You see fences lashed together with sinew. You see huts that look less like shelters and more like the rib cages of giant prehistoric insects. Welcome to the architecture of agony. The sixth brutally honest truth about the Falmer is that their craftsmanship is a direct reflection of their sensory reality. Because they cannot see, they do not build for aesthetics. They do not build for symmetry. They build for sensation. Every surface, every wall, and every gate in a Falmer hive is designed to be felt, smelled, and heard. It is a built environment that is utterly hostile to anyone who relies on their eyes and intuitively navigable for anyone who lives in the dark. Let's look at the core in-game fact that defines this style. The primary building material of the Falmer is Chaurus chitin. In Skyrim, you encounter this constantly. Their tents, their chests, their fences, and even their bridges are constructed from the exoskeletons of the giant insects they breed. But think about the implication of this. They aren't mining stone. They aren't chopping wood, usually. They are harvesting their architecture from the bodies of the creatures they live with. This means that a Falmer city isn't built. It's butchered. Every brick in a Falmer wall was once alive. Every support beam was once a leg. This gives their settlements a terrifying biological unity. The walls have the same texture as their armor, which has the same texture as their food. It is a civilization of monoculture, based entirely on the recycling of insectoid matter. But the genius, and the horror, of Falmer architecture lies in how it accommodates the blind. To a sighted player, a Falmer hut looks like a chaotic mess of spikes and leather. It looks primitive, like a bad camping trip gone wrong, but close your eyes, metaphorically please keep watching the video, and imagine running your hand along it. The textures are distinct. The chitin is smooth and hard, offering no resistance. The leather bindings are taut and slightly rough. The spikes are sharp warnings. A Falmer moving through their hive doesn't need a sign that says keep out. They feel the sharp barricade of a Chaurus spur and know instinctively that this is a boundary. They feel the soft give of a cured hide floor and know this is a sleeping area. The architecture is braille written in bone and bug shells. This focus on tactile feedback explains why everything in a Falmer dungeon looks so sharp. It's not just to look scary for the player, it's a tactile navigation system. Sharp means edge, smooth means path, sticky means food or poison. And then there is the smell. The game can't render smell, thank the divines, because a Falmer hive probably smells like ammonia, rotting meat and wet fungus. But the architecture is designed to trap and channel scents. The enclosed nature of their huts, which are often made of thick, non-porous chitin, would hold pheromones and scents incredibly well. Here is an obscure lore tidbit that adds a layer of sophistication to this savagery. If you examine the bone chimes scattered throughout Falmer areas, those dangling strings of bone and antlers that rattle when you walk into them, you realise they aren't just decorations, they are a passive sonar system. The Falmer have hyper-developed hearing. When an intruder, that's you, clanking around in Daedric armour, brushes against a bone chime, the sound echoes through the cavern. But it's not just an alarm. The specific acoustic resonance of the cavern allows the Falmer to pinpoint exactly where the disturbance is. They have turned their architecture into a giant ear. The chimes, the taut leather skins acting as drums, the hollow chitin tubes, the entire hive is an instrument, and you are playing the song of your own death just by walking through it. Community debates often swirl around the question, why do they build tents indoors? They live in caves that are already sheltered from the rain and wind. Why build a roof inside a roof? The prevailing theory is that it's about acoustics and comfort, not weather. The vast, echoing chambers of Blackreach or a Dwemer ruin might be disorienting for a creature that relies on echolocation. Too much open space makes the sound scatter. By building small, tight, leather-bound pods, they create controlled acoustic environments. It's the difference between trying to have a conversation in a cathedral versus a recording booth. The pods make them feel safe because they dampen the overwhelming noise of the deep earth machinery. Also, let's be honest, it's about heat. Chitin is a great insulator. In the damp, cold depths of Skyrim, those pods trap body heat. A Falmer hive is essentially a pile of warm, breathing bodies huddled together in insect shell sleeping bags. It's a grotesque kind of coziness. The aesthetic of the Falmer also stands in stark defiance of their former masters. The Dwemer were obsessed with the inorganic, metal, stone, steam. The Falmer rejected this completely. There is almost no metal in Falmer construction, save for what they scavenge or use for weapons. They reverted to the primal, the organic, the soft. It's a psychological rejection of the Dwemer's cold logic. If the Dwemer represent the cruelty of the machine, the Falmer represent the cruelty of the swamp. However, there is a level of artistry here that we often miss while we are power attacking through the dungeon. Look at the chests. The Falmer chest is a bizarre, organic-looking container that almost looks like a seed pod or an egg. It has no visible hinges. It seems to open by unspooling or expanding. This suggests a mastery of biological engineering. They aren't just nailing boards together, they are manipulating the natural elasticity of the materials. They're warping the chitin while it is still fresh and pliable, moulding it into shapes that harden into rock-solid containers. It's a form of bone singing or flesh crafting that has been lost to the surface world. And we have to talk about the gates. You know the ones, the spiked barriers that retract into the ground or swing open with a wet clicking sound. They don't use gears. They use counterweights made of bone and tension cords made of gut. It is primitive technology refined to a lethal edge. It's silent, mostly, efficient, and easy to repair with the materials at hand. If a gear breaks in a Dwemer mechanism, you need a forge to fix it. If a cord snaps in a Falmer gate, you just kill another Chaurus and strip its intestines. It is sustainable engineering in its most horrific form. There is a popular fan theory that the visual design of the Falmer hive is actually based on the anatomy of the inner ear or internal organs. The spiralling ramps, the rounded huts, the tunnel-like bridges, it mimics the biological structures of hearing and digestion. Since they cannot look out at the horizon, they look in. They build what they know, and what they know is the biology of the things they eat and the bodies they inhabit. They are living inside a model of their own physiological existence. Let's also acknowledge the sheer intimidation factor. The architecture is designed to terrify. The totems made of skulls, the impaled heads, the sprawling limbs of Chaurus woven into the fences. This is psychological warfare. Even though they can't see it, they know what fear smells like. They know that when a surface dweller sees a wall made of giant insect legs, that dweller's heart rate goes up. And the Falmer can hear that heart beating. This architecture of agony also extends to their traps. The Falmer love a good trap, but unlike the Dwemer, who use mathematical pressure plates and spinning blades, the Falmer use gravity and momentum. The claw trap, that massive wall of spikes that swings down to smack you in the face, is a favourite. It's brutal, simple, and effective. It doesn't require magic, it just requires a heavy rock and a rope. It speaks to a cunning intelligence that understands physics on a visceral level. Heavy thing hits soft thing, dead thing. We also see evidence of their corruption in the specific locations they choose to inhabit within the Dwemer ruins. They don't take over the throne rooms or the lecture halls. They infest the pumping stations, the sewers, the fungal gardens. They build their chitin cities on top of the Dwemer infrastructure like a cancer growing on a microchip. This juxtaposition is one of the strongest environmental storytelling elements in Skyrim. You see the gold brass of the Dwemer, and then, welded onto it by slime and sinew, is the dark chitin of the Falmer. It is a visual representation of the parasite consuming the host. Finally, consider the cleanliness, or lack thereof. Dwemer ruins are sterile, mostly thanks to the spiders. Nordic ruins are dusty. Falmer hives are wet. The floors are slick with slime, blood and water. This is deliberate. A moist environment carries scent better than a dry one. It also muffles footsteps. They have terraformed their pockets of the earth to be perpetually damp, creating a sensory playground for themselves and a slipping hazard for you. So, the next time you are sneaking through a Falmer hive, take a moment to look at the walls. Really look at them. Realise that that wood is actually the leg of a monster. Realise that the rope is a dried intestine. Realise that the layout of the camp is a physical map of a blind person's nightmare. They have built a world that hates you, constructed from the corpses of the only friends they have. And speaking of friends, we cannot discuss the architecture without discussing the source of the materials. We've mentioned the Chaurus, but to truly understand the Falmer, we have to understand the symbiotic, abusive, and absolutely grotesque relationship they have with these giant insects. It's not just livestock farming, it's a codependency that borders on a hive mind. If you have ever played Skyrim with a good pair of headphones, there is one sound that triggers a primal fight-or-flight response faster than a dragon's roar. It's that wet, rhythmic skitter-click-skitter coming from the darkness ahead. It's the sound of a Chaurus, and usually where there is one Chaurus, there is a Falmer lurking nearby, stroking its antennae like a twisted version of a Bond villain with a cat. This brings us to the seventh brutally honest truth. The Falmer didn't just adapt to the dark, they adopted a monster to help them rule it. The relationship between the Falmer and the Chaurus is the most successful, efficient, and absolutely repulsive example of symbiosis in Tamriel. It isn't just husbandry, it's a biological merger. Let's be real for a second. The Chaurus is a nightmare. It's a giant venom-spitting centipede with armor plating that can deflect steel and mandibles that can crush bone. Any sane civilization would burn them with fire. The Falmer looked at this clicking horror and said, "I'm going to make a hat out of that, and then I'm going to ride it." The core in-game fact here is visible in every single Falmer dungeon. The Falmer utilize every single part of the Chaurus. It is the whole buffalo philosophy of the Native Americans, applied to a giant poisonous insect. They eat the meat, which must taste awful considering the poison. They use the chitin for their armor, shields, and huts. They use the venom to coat their weapons. They harvest the eggs, those glowing, pulsating piles of goo we love to loot for alchemy, to breed the next generation. They even use the creatures as guard dogs and siege engines. This level of domestication implies a relationship that has lasted for thousands of years. You don't domesticate a giant centipede overnight. This suggests that shortly after the Falmer went blind, they began this process. Perhaps the Chaurus were the only other living things in the deep caves that didn't immediately try to eat them. Or perhaps the Falmer just proved too poisonous to digest. But the connection goes deeper than just resources. It's behavioural. Watch a Falmer and a Chaurus fight together. They move in sync. The Chaurus acts as the tank, absorbing damage and spraying poison to disorient the enemy. The Falmer acts as the striker, weaving in and out of the chaos to deliver the killing blow. They don't shout commands. The communication seems almost telepathic, or at least pheromonal. The Falmer, blind and reliant on smell, likely smells exactly like a Chaurus to the insect. To the Chaurus, the Falmer is just a weird, two-legged broodmate. This leads to a fascinating obscure lore tidbit introduced in the Dawnguard DLC. Before Dawnguard, we just thought Chaurus were crawling horrors, but the DLC introduced the Chaurus Hunter, the flying winged stage of the Chaurus life cycle. We learned that the crawling centipedes are just the larvae. When they pupate, they burst out of their shells as buzzing, mosquito-like monstrosities. The lore implication here is staggering. The Falmer actively manage this life cycle. We find chrysalises in the Falmer hives in the Forgotten Vale, massive hanging sacks where the Chaurus are transforming. The Falmer aren't just letting them run wild, they're farming them through metamorphosis. They know exactly when to harvest a Chaurus for chitin, likely before the shell hardens too much or right before pupation, and when to let one mature into a hunter for aerial defence. This requires a level of biological knowledge that rivals the best scholars of the College of Winterhold. And let's talk about the armour. Falmer heavy armour, that terrifying jagged set you see on the high-level warmongers, is essentially a Chaurus cosplay. By wearing the shell of the insect, the Falmer is physically mimicking its partner. It's psychological armouring. I am not a soft elf, I am a hard insect. It blurs the line between the rider and the mount. When you see them in the dark, you can't tell where the myrrh ends and the bug begins. There is a disturbing community debate and fan theory regarding the hierarchy of this relationship. Some players argue that the Falmer aren't actually in charge. The theory, often called the hive mind theory, suggests that the Chaurus are part of a larger insectoid hive consciousness, and that the Falmer have been subsumed into it. The Falmer aren't the farmers, they are the worker drones. Think about it. The Falmer spend their entire lives serving the needs of the Chaurus, feeding them, protecting their eggs, building structures to house them. The Falmer literally cover themselves in Chaurus parts. Are they masters, or are they just the most useful servants the Chaurus ever found? It flips the script. Maybe the fungus the Dwemer gave them contained Chaurus DNA or pheromones, chemically binding the elves to the bugs forever. The horror of the Chaurus symbiosis is amplified by the environment. Chaurus pens are some of the most grotesque places in Skyrim. The ground is covered in strange slime. There are piles of half-eaten gore, likely the remains of surface dwellers dragged down for feed. And in the middle of it all, the Falmer walk calmly, petting the mandibles of creatures that could snap a Nord in half. It's a twisted reflection of the surface world. The Nords have their dogs and horses, the Falmer have their Chaurus. But where a dog offers unconditional love, a Chaurus offers unconditional poison. It highlights the hostility of the world the Falmer inhabit. You can't survive the deep dark with a golden retriever. You need a monster. We also have to consider the Chaurus Reaper. This is the giant, boss-level Chaurus you sometimes encounter. The existence of these alpha predators within the Falmer hives suggests that the Falmer respect strength. They don't cull the strongest Chaurus, they worship them, or at least they utilise them as heavy shock troops. A Falmer Shadowmaster standing next to a Chaurus Reaper is a duo that can wipe out an entire party of adventurers. It represents the pinnacle of their twisted evolution, the Master of Shadow and the Master of Poison, united against the light. And let's be honest, the loot tells a story. When you kill a Chaurus, you find Chaurus eggs. When you kill a Falmer, you also often find Chaurus eggs in their inventory. They carry them around. Are they snacks? Are they carrying them to a new incubator? Or do they hold them with a strange maternal affection? Here is my little biting baby. It's weirdly touching, in a vomit-inducing sort of way. The Chaurus also provide the Falmer with their primary technological edge, poison. The Falmer are the undisputed masters of toxins in Skyrim. Their weapons are almost always coated in it. This poison comes directly from the Chaurus glands. The Falmer have essentially industrialized the harvesting of venom. They don't need to study alchemy tables, they just need to milk their livestock. This gives them a distinct advantage in combat. One scratch from a Falmer arrow, and your vision blurs, your stamina drains, and you start panic-chugging potions. That is the gift of the Chaurus. But the most tragic aspect of this symbiosis is what it replaced. The Snow Elves were once worshippers of Oriel. They revered the eagle and the sun. Their symbology was avian and celestial. Now their totem animal is a blind, subterranean worm. They have traded the flight of the eagle for the crawl of the centipede. It is a symbolic descent from the heavens to the dirt. They no longer look up, they look down. This shift is visible in the Dawnguard DLC when we enter the Forgotten Vale. We see the feral Falmer living alongside the Chaurus even in this holy place. They have brought their infestation with them into the sanctuary. It's like finding a cockroach nest in a cathedral. It emphasises that the corruption is internal. Even if you put a Falmer back in a beautiful sunlit valley, he will still dig a hole and fill it with bugs because that is what he knows now. The Chaurus symbiosis also serves as a barrier to any potential cure or redemption. If you wanted to save the Falmer, you would first have to separate them from the Chaurus. But the Chaurus are their source of food, clothing, weapons, and defence. Taking away the Chaurus would be a second genocide. They would starve or be eaten by other predators. They are trapped in this relationship. They cannot survive without the monster, and so they must remain monsters themselves. And let's not forget the sheer numbers. A Chaurus lays hundreds of eggs. We see the clusters everywhere. This allows the Falmer population to sustain itself and expand rapidly. As long as there are Chaurus, the Falmer have an endless supply of resources. It makes them a logistical threat. They aren't a dying race, they are a booming one, fueled by an endless cycle of insect reproduction. So the next time you hear that skittering sound, remember what it represents. It's not just a bug, it's the lifeline of a fallen civilization. It is the armour on their back, the sword in their hand, and the food in their belly. The Falmer and the Chaurus are one entity, a hydra of chitin and hate. But before we write off the Snow Elves completely as bug-worshipping troglodytes, we have to acknowledge that not all of them fell. Not all of them took the Dwemer's deal. There is a place where the sun still shines on elven masonry, where the snow is still white, and where the memory of what they once were is preserved in tragic frozen silence. If you play Skyrim long enough, you get used to the gloom, the grey skies, the brown dungeons, the black depths of Blackreach. Your eyes adjust to the drab palette of a world in decline, and then, usually about 20 hours into the Dawnguard DLC, you stumble through the back exit of Darkfall Cave, and your retinas are immediately assaulted by something you haven't seen in centuries: hope. Welcome to the Forgotten Vale. The eighth brutally honest truth about the Falmer is that they weren't just primitive refugees who got lucky with a few spells. They were the architects of one of the most beautiful civilizations Tamriel has ever seen, and the Forgotten Vale is the heartbreaking receipt for everything that was stolen from them. Walking into this valley isn't just a change of scenery, it is an archaeological punch to the gut. It forces you to look at the snarling monsters in the caves and realise, oh gods, they built this. The Vale is a hidden pocket of reality, tucked away in the Druidak Mountains between Skyrim and High Rock. It has been isolated from the rest of the world for thousands of years. Here, the snow is pristine white, not stained with war. The water glows with a turquoise luminescence. The flora is vibrant and untouched. It is a glimpse of the Merethic era frozen in amber. The core in-game fact that dominates this landscape is the Chantry of Auriel. This isn't a small chapel. It's a massive, sprawling religious complex that puts the Temple of the Divines in solitude to shame. We see the way shrines, elegant, floating structures of white stone and magic that serve as teleportation hubs. We see the inner sanctum, a cathedral of light and gold. The sheer scale of the masonry proves that the Snow Elves were master builders. They didn't just stack rocks, they wove stone with light. When you look at the architecture of the Vale, you see the solar theme everywhere. Sunbursts, eagles, ascending spires. It is the direct opposite of the Dwemer's subterranean cubes and the Nords' heavy timber halls. It is delicate, vertical, and aspirational. It is a culture that looked up. Seeing this splendour makes the current state of the Falmer even more nauseating. You realise that the creature biting your ankle in a dungeon has the genetic potential to design a cathedral that floats. But the Vale isn't just empty ruins. It has a caretaker, Knight-Paladin Gelebor. Meeting him is one of the most surreal moments in the entire Elder Scrolls series. He is a living, breathing snow elf. He hasn't gone blind, he hasn't devolved. He stands tall, articulate and tragic, wearing the gleaming white armour of his order. Gelebor serves as the living proof of what was lost. Listening to his voice, calm, pious, tinged with infinite sadness, is a stark contrast to the guttural hisses of the betrayed. He calls the monsters the betrayed, a term loaded with empathy. He doesn't hate them, he pities them. He sees them as victims of a terrible crime, which, as we've established, is the absolute truth. Now, let's inspect an obscure lore tidbit found within the Vale, the Paragon system. Scattered around the valley are the Paragons, gems of immense power held by frost giants. These aren't just pretty rocks to sell to Belethor. When inserted into the Paragon platform, they open portals to secluded treasuries and inaccessible ledges. This reveals a crucial detail about Snow Elf society. They had mastered portal magic as a form of public transit. They didn't just walk to the bank, they teleported. The casual use of such high-level magic for infrastructure suggests a society where magicka was as common as electricity is for us. They were a high magic civilization, perhaps even more so than the modern High Elves of Alinor. The collapse of this society wasn't just a loss of life, it was a technological regression for the entire continent. The tragedy of the Forgotten Vale is compounded by the fact that it almost worked. This was a sanctuary that the Dwemer didn't touch. The Nords didn't find it. For centuries, while their brethren were eating toxic fungus and turning into goblins, the Snow Elves of the Vale were continuing their worship, maintaining their culture, and living in peace. They were the control group in this horrific experiment. But the truth is, isolation is not immunity. The Forgotten Vale is infested. The betrayed, the corrupted Falmer from the deep found a way in. We see their huts defacing the pristine white ice of the frozen lake. We see them patrolling the glacial crevice. They have swarmed up from the dark underneath to besiege the last bastion of their own light. There is a poignant community debate about the geography of the Snow Elves. Many fans argue that the existence of the Forgotten Vale implies there must be other hidden enclaves. If this one valley survived for thousands of years, surely there are others. Perhaps deep in the Velethi Mountains, or hidden by illusion magic in the forests of High Rock. It's a hopeful theory. The Wisp Mother theory touches on this, which we'll get to, but the Vale suggests otherwise. The population here is gone. Gelebor is arguably the last one, save for his brother. The Falmer have overrun it. The Vale feels less like a thriving hidden city and more like a tomb that hasn't been sealed yet. It is the Titanic moments after it hit the iceberg. The lights are still on, the band is still playing, but the water is rising fast. The gameplay experience of the Vale also reinforces the Lost Paradise theme. It is one of the few places in Skyrim where you don't feel the oppressive weight of the Civil War or the return of the dragons. It feels disconnected from time. The music shifts to a haunting, ethereal choir. You aren't fighting for the Empire or the Stormcloaks here, you are witnessing the funeral of an era. And let's be honest, the Vale is dangerous. It's beautiful, but it tries to kill you. You have two dragons bursting out of a frozen lake, Naslarum and Voslarum, great names by the way. You have Falmer wandering the ice sheets. You have frost giants who can launch you into orbit. The beauty is a mask. The Snow Elves lived in a harsh, cold environment and tamed it with magic. Without them, the environment has gone feral. We also have to talk about the prelates. These are the ghosts of the Snow Elf priests who still maintain the way shrines. They don't realise they are dead. They don't realise their civilization is gone. They repeat their welcoming scripts, offering you water from the basin, stuck in a loop of eternal service. Talking to a prelate is deeply unsettling. They ask if you are a pilgrim. They speak of the glory of Auriel. They are holograms of the past, unaware that the pilgrims who usually visit are now blind monsters who want to eat their ectoplasm. It emphasises the total disconnect between the Snow Elf past and the Falmer present. The memory has survived, but the mind is gone. The visual storytelling in the inner sanctum is particularly telling. Inside, you see the statues of the Snow Elves. They are tall, regal, holding staves and spheres of light. Then you look at the frozen, statuesque corpses of the Falmer, the frozen ones held in stasis by Vertha's magic. The physiological difference is jarring. You can literally measure the devolution in feet and inches. The Snow Elves were sleek and upright. The Falmer are hunched and jagged. The Forgotten Vale also forces us to reevaluate the Nords. We see what they destroyed. It wasn't just a military threat. They destroyed a culture capable of creating wondrous beauty. If the Snow Elves and Nords had coexisted, imagine what Skyrim could have been. Nordic steel combined with Snow Elf light magic. They could have ruled Tamriel. Instead, we got windswept ruins and a racism-fueled axe. The existence of the Vale also raises the question, why didn't the Vale Elves try to save their brethren? They must have known. Gelebor knows. He speaks of the betrayal with knowledge. Did they try to send rescue parties into Blackreach? Did they try to offer an alternative to the Dwemer deal? Or did they seal their borders, terrified that the corruption might be contagious? The brutally honest truth might be that the Snow Elves of the Vale chose self-preservation over solidarity. They hid while their cousins burned, and in the end, it didn't save them. The darkness found them anyway. The most crushing moment in the Vale is when you realise that Gelebor expects you to kill his own brother, to save the race's dignity. He has no illusions about rebuilding. He knows it's over. He just wants the corruption to end. He wants the betrayed to be put to rest, and he wants the sanctity of the shrine restored, even if no one is left to worship at it. It is a suicide mission for a species. As you leave the Vale, looking back at the gleaming temple one last time, you carry a heavy burden. You're now one of the few living beings who knows the truth. You know that the Falmer aren't just monsters. They are the wreckage of greatness. You know that the clicking sounds in the dark are the cries of a people who once commanded the sun. But the rot in the Vale wasn't just from the invaders. The ultimate tragedy of the Snow Elves is that the final nail in their coffin didn't come from the Dwemer, and it didn't come from the Nords. It came from their own leadership. It came from the very top of their religious hierarchy. Because while the refugees were being blinded in the deep, the Arch-Curate in the High Tower was facing a darkness of his own, one that would turn their holiest prophecy into a weapon of mass destruction. We have spent a lot of time blaming the Nords for their brutality and the Dwemer for their calculated cruelty. It feels good to have clear villains, the barbarian with the axe and the scientist with the poison. But the ninth brutally honest truth about the Falmer forces us to look in the mirror, or rather, it forces the Snow Elves to look in the mirror, only to find they have no reflection. Because the final dagger in the back of the Snow Elf civilization didn't come from an enemy. It came from their own high priest. The tragedy of the Snow Elves is a tragedy of leadership failure. First, the Snow Prince dies. Then, the refugees trust the Dwemer. And finally, in the pristine seclusion of the Forgotten Vale, the highest religious authority of their entire race decides to burn it all down because he caught a bad case of the flu. Well, sanguinare vampiris to be exact. Let's talk about Arch-Curate Vurtha. If you've finished the Dawnguard DLC, you know the twist. You climb the stairs to the inner sanctum, expecting to find a holy guardian protecting Auriel's bow from the forces of darkness. Instead, you find Vurtha sitting on a throne surrounded by frozen Falmer, looking like he hasn't slept in 4,000 years. And the core in-game fact drops like a hammer. Vurtha is a vampire. And not just any vampire. He is the author of the Tyranny of the Sun prophecy. This recontextualizes the entire plot of the DLC. Harkon, the big bad vampire lord we spend the whole game fearing, is essentially just a fanboy reading Vurtha's fanfiction. Harkon thinks he discovered an ancient prophecy. In reality, he discovered a revenge note written by a disgruntled ex-employee of Auriel. Vurtha's story is the ultimate example of main character syndrome gone wrong. As the Arch-Curate, he was the voice of Auriel on Nian. He was the intermediary between the Snow Elves and their chief deity, the god of time and the sun. Then, one of his own initiates infected him with vampirism. Now, a rational person might think, that's unfortunate. I should seek a cure, or perhaps step down. Vurtha decided that because Auriel didn't magically zap the disease out of his veins the second it happened, the god had betrayed him. The logic is breathtakingly narcissistic. I am sick, therefore God is dead. And since he turned his back on me, I'm going to shoot the sun out of the sky. It's the theological equivalent of keying your ex's car, except the car is the source of all life on the planet. This betrayal is profound because of who Auriel is to the Snow Elves. To the Nords, Akatosh is the dragon god of time. To the Snow Elves, Auriel is that, but he is also inextricably linked to the sun. The sun is the whole Magnus Tor in the sky, the source of magicka, the light of Aetherius. For a Snow Elf, a being of light and magic, the sun is everything. Vampirism isn't just a disease for them, it is a spiritual inversion. It makes the sun, their god, into their deadly enemy. Vurtha's agony wasn't just physical burning, it was the realization that his god was now actively hurting him, and instead of accepting this as the nature of the Daedric curse, he blamed Auriel. He crafted the prophecy to blot out the sun not just to help vampires rule, but to blind Auriel. If the sun is blocked, Auriel cannot see Nirn. It was an act of cosmic spite. This leads to a fascinating obscure lore tidbit regarding the connection between the Falmer corruption and Vurtha's plan. We notice that the inner sanctum is full of frozen Falmer. These aren't statues. They are living betrayed Falmer, held in magical stasis by Vurtha. When the fight starts, he wakes them up to attack you. This implies that Vurtha has been controlling the betrayed for a long time. While his brother Gelebor stood outside guarding the way shrines, Vurtha was inside, hoarding the corrupted monsters. He wasn't trying to cure them, he was weaponizing them. He saw the devolution of his race not as a tragedy to be mourned, but as a resource to be exploited for his revenge. He became exactly like the Dwemer he likely despised. The Dwemer used the Falmer for labour, Vurtha used them for security. There is a grim irony in the fact that Vurtha needs the blood of a daughter of Coldharbour to make the prophecy work. Serana is essential, but Vurtha didn't know Serana existed when he wrote the prophecy. He just knew he needed pure vampire blood. He essentially wrote a spell requirement so high that he had to wait thousands of years for the right reagent to walk through the door, and when you and Serana finally show up, he doesn't see a person, he sees a battery. This connects back to the theme of erosion of the soul. Vurtha still looks like a snow elf. He speaks perfectly. He hasn't physically devolved into a goblin creature, but spiritually, he is more Falmer than the creatures crawling in the dark. He has lost all empathy. He's willing to sacrifice the world to soothe his own ego. The betrayed lost their souls by force. Vurtha sold his for revenge. The community debate around Vurtha often centers on Auriel's silence. Why did the god abandon him? In the Elder Scrolls universe, gods are usually pretty active. They intervene, they bless, but Auriel did nothing. Some fans theorize that Auriel couldn't help. Vampirism is the domain of Molag Bal, a Daedric prince. The princes and the Aedra, like Auriel, have a complex power dynamic. Perhaps Molag Bal's claim on Vurtha's soul was so strong that Auriel was locked out. Others suggest a darker theory. Auriel realized Vurtha was unworthy. The god saw the narcissism in his heart and let the disease run its course as a test Vurtha failed spectacularly. By turning to revenge immediately, Vurtha proved he was never a true servant of the light, only a servant of his own status. And let's be honest, the boss fight with Vurtha is one of the most cinematic moments in Skyrim. You're on a balcony overlooking the Vale, the sun is setting or rising. He's collapsing the ceiling on you. He is summoning ancient frost atronachs and waves of betrayed. It feels like the climax of an epic movie, but listen to his dialogue. He turned his back on me. He abandoned us. It's a tantrum, a several thousand-year-old tantrum. He is the ultimate toxic ex-boyfriend of the theological world. This betrayal also explains why the Forgotten Vale fell. Gelebor mentions that the betrayed overran the chantry, but how did they get organised enough to storm a fortress of light magic? It's highly probable Vurtha let them in, or, at the very least, his corruption weakened the magical wards protecting the sanctum. The rotting of the head caused the death of the body. The Arch-Curate's darkness acted as a beacon, drawing the monsters up from the deep. We also have to consider the Auriel's bow artifact itself. It is a weapon of the sun. It does sun damage. It causes sun explosions. Vurtha, a vampire, wants to use this holy weapon to destroy its own source of power. It's a perversion of the artifact's purpose. It's like using a fire extinguisher to spread a fire. This inversion of purpose, healing to harming, light to dark, protection to destruction, is the hallmark of the Falmer story. When you finally kill Vurtha, look at his body. He's wearing the ancient snow elf armour, but it's a unique variant. It has a slightly different tint. Even his gear has been subtly corrupted, and when he dies, he doesn't explode into dust like a normal vampire usually. He just falls. Auriel doesn't descend to catch him. Molag Bal doesn't open a portal to claim him. He just dies, alone on a cold balcony, having accomplished nothing but the destruction of his own legacy. Serana's reaction here is pivotal. She, a vampire born of a horrific ritual, looks at Vurtha and feels disgust. She realizes that he is pathetic. It's a brutally honest moment for her character arc too. She sees what obsession with prophecy and revenge does to a person. It turns you into Vurtha. So, the ninth truth is that the Snow Elves were fighting a war on 3 fronts. 1. The physical war against the Nords. 2. the psychological war against the Dwemer. 3. The spiritual war against their own leadership. They never stood a chance. The pillars of their society, military, Snow Prince, magical, the Pact, and religious, Vyrthur, all crumbled. But while Vyrthur was sulking in his tower and the surface elves were dying, the Falmer in the deep were not idle. They weren't just victims waiting to die. Oh no. Down in the blackness, amidst the steam pipes and the glowing mushrooms, they were getting organised. They were breeding. And eventually they decided they had had enough of the Dwemer's hospitality. This brings us to the secret war that raged beneath the feet of the oblivious Nords for centuries. The history books don't mention it. The bards don't sing of it. But if you look closely at the Dwemer ruins, you can see the scars of a conflict that was just as brutal as the one on the surface. The Falmer didn't just devolve, they rebelled. While Vyrthur was throwing his millennial-long pity party in the Forgotten Vale, and the Nords on the surface were busy inventing new words for conquest, something cataclysmic was happening beneath the earth. Most history books in Skyrim, the ones written by Imperial scholars who rarely leave their comfortable libraries in Cyrodiil, will tell you that the Dwemer disappeared mysteriously in 1E700. They might mention that the Snow Elves were their slaves, but they leave out the bloodiest chapter of the story. The 10th brutally honest truth about the Falmer is that they didn't just passively endure their slavery until the Dwemer vanished. They broke their chains. They fought a bloody centuries-long rebellion known as the War of the Crag, a conflict so massive it likely spanned the entirety of Blackreach and beyond. Yet it happened in such total silence that the Nords walking directly above it didn't hear a sound. Imagine the scenario. You have the Dwemer, the most technologically advanced race in history. They have tonal architecture, steam centurions, automated crossbows, and the ability to warp reality with math. And they are fighting the Falmer, a race of blind, poisoned, chitin-clad rebels armed with sticks and bug parts. On paper, this should have been a massacre. The Dwemer should have wiped them out in an afternoon, but they didn't. The war lasted for decades. This proves a terrifying competence in the Falmer. Despite their devolution, despite their loss of sight and higher magic, they were smart enough, vicious enough, and numerous enough to stalemate the Dwemer war machine. The betrayed weren't just victims, they were an existential threat to their masters. The core in-game fact that anchors this is found in the lore books scattered around Skyrim, specifically the Falmer, a study. The text explicitly mentions the War of the Krieg, describing it as a constant bloody insurrection. It reveals that the Falmer fled into the deepest, most inaccessible fissures of the subterranean world, places even the Dwemer couldn't easily reach with their bulky centurions, and launched guerrilla raids. Think about the tactical nightmare of fighting the Falmer on their home turf. The Dwemer rely on logic, light, and line of sight. Their machines use sensors. The Falmer rely on sound and smell. They could swarm a Dwemer patrol in pitch darkness, tear the tonal architects apart before they could cast a single spell, and vanish back into the steam vents before the Centurions powered up. It was Vietnam in the dark. This war fundamentally changed the geography of the underground. When you explore Blackreach today, you aren't just looking at a city, you're looking at a battlefield. The Silent City is a fortress. Have you ever noticed how the main Dwemer structures in Blackreach are heavily fortified, often with high walls and controlled choke points? They weren't afraid of the surface dwellers. They were afraid of the ventilation shafts. They were afraid of their own basement. We can also infer that the Falmer use their numbers and their adaptability. The Dwemer take decades to build a Centurion and years to train a tonal architect. The Falmer, they breed like rabbits, or Chaurus. If the Dwemer killed 10 Falmer, 20 more were born in the fungal darkness. It was a war of attrition. The Dwemer had quality, the Falmer had quantity, and a suicidal lack of fear. This leads to a fascinating obscure lore tidbit regarding the Dwemer's ultimate fate. We know they vanished when Kagrenac struck the heart of Lorcan during the Battle of Red Mountain. But why was Kagrenac so desperate? Why did he rush the ritual? The standard history says he was losing the war against the Chimera Nords on the surface of Morrowind. But remember, the Dwemer Empire stretched across Skyrim and Hammerfell too. The theory is that the Dwemer were fighting a two-front war. In Morrowind, they were fighting the Chimera. In Skyrim, they were losing control of the War of the Crag. The Falmer were pushing them back. They had taken the lower levels, They were sabotaging the infrastructure. The Dwemer civilization was under siege from within and without. This pressure might explain why Kagrenac gambled everything on a hasty apotheosis. He wasn't just trying to win a battle, he was trying to escape a reality where his own slaves were eating his people alive. The War of the Krieg also explains the specific animosity between the Dwemer machines and the Falmer we see in-game. Even today, thousands of years later, Dwemer spiders and spheres will immediately attack Falmer on sight. This isn't just a hostile faction mechanic, it's hard-coded martial law. The machines are still fighting the war. The security protocols of Alftund and Mzincha haven't been updated since the First Era. To a Dwemer sphere, the War of the Crag never ended. It sees a Falmer, it identifies an insurgent, and it deploys the spinning blades. There is a grim community debate about who was actually winning when the Dwemer disappeared. Some fans argue the Dwemer had it under control, treating the Falmer like a pest infestation. Others argue the Falmer were on the brink of victory. Consider this. The Falmer know the ruins better than we do. They have bypassed the locks, they have smashed the walls. In many dungeons we see Falmer hives built inside the grand halls, right on top of the Dwemer furniture. This suggests that in the final days the Falmer had breached the perimeter. They were inside the wire. The disappearance of the Dwemer might have been the only thing that saved the Snow Elves from being totally wiped out in a final, scorched earth retaliation, or, conversely, it robbed the Falmer of their ultimate vengeance. Imagine the moment the Dwemer vanished. The Falmer are massing for an attack. They are sharpening their Chaurus swords. They pour into the Great Hall, ready to slaughter their masters, and nothing. The armour is empty. The tools are dropped on the floor. The steam is still hissing. The gears are still turning, but the oppressors are gone. It must have been baffling and terrifying. Did the Falmer think they had won? Did they think it was a trick? Or did they just sniff the air, realise the scent of Dwemer was gone forever, and claim the city for themselves? This inheritance is the ultimate irony. The Falmer fought to be free of the Dwemer, but when the Dwemer left, the Falmer didn't leave. They didn't return to the surface. They stayed. They moved into the house of their abusers. They became the squatters of Blackreach. Why? Because by the time the war ended, they were no longer surface creatures. The War of the Crag had forged them into deep dwellers. They had adapted so perfectly to killing Dwemer in the dark that they couldn't exist anywhere else. They had become the ghost in the machine of the underground. We also see evidence of this war in the specific Falmer items that are actually repurposed Dwemer tech. The heavy chitin armour often incorporates metal plates that look suspiciously like Dwemer scraps. Their weapons, while organic, mimic the shapes of Dwemer blades. They learned from their enemy. The War of the Craig was a crucible that accelerated their cultural shift from elven grace to brutal efficiency. And let's be honest, the Nords upstairs had no clue. This is the funniest, darkest part of the timeline. While King Harold or whoever was sitting on the throne in Windhelm drinking mead and worrying about harvest taxes, a literal species-wide race war was happening 50 feet below his cellar. It highlights the disconnected layers of Skyrim's reality. You have the political layer, civil war, the mythical layer, dragons, and the subterranean layer, Falmer Dwemer. They rarely touch, but when they do, it's catastrophic. The War of the Crag also serves to humanize, or at least contextualize, the Falmer's aggression toward the player. When you drop into a Dwemer ruin, you are invading a sovereign territory that they fought a centuries-long war to liberate. To them, you aren't an adventurer, you are an invader. You look like a surface dweller, like the Nords who hunted them, and you use technology, like the Dwemer who enslaved them. You are the worst of both worlds. Of course they want to kill you. You represent every trauma in their history combined into one loot-hungry package. Furthermore, the existence of the Falmer warmongers and shadowmasters implies a military hierarchy born of this war. These aren't just tribal titles. Warmonger suggests a designated leader of conflict. These ranks likely originated during the rebellion. The structure of Falmer society isn't just a chaotic hive, it's a degenerated military junta. They are still organised for a war that ended 3,000 years ago. It's also worth noting the sheer tragedy of the blind moth priests comparison. We revere the moth priests who go blind reading the Elder Scrolls. We see their blindness as a sacrifice for knowledge. The Falmer went blind for survival, and then fought a war in that blindness. But because they are monsters, their struggle is framed as an infestation rather than a revolution. If the story were told from their perspective, the War of the Crag would be their Stormcloak Rebellion, a desperate fight for independence against a technologically superior empire. But the War of the Crag ended in a hollow victory. The Masters vanished, but the curse remained. The Falmer were free, but they were still blind, still poisoned, and now they were alone in the dark with nothing but their hatred. And without the Dwemer to focus their rage on, that hatred began to curdle. It turned outward. It turned toward anything that had a pulse and a soul. The rebellion proved they could fight. It proved they could organize, but it also proved that they had lost the capacity for mercy. And as they secured their hold on the underground, they began to look for new subjects to enact their twisted will upon. This brings us to the dark reality of what happens when the Falmer take prisoners. It's not just about food, it's about something far more sinister. There is a comforting lie we tell ourselves when we play RPGs. We tell ourselves that the monsters are just beasts. A wolf kills you because it's hungry. A troll attacks you because you're in its territory. It's nature. It's impartial. But the 11th brutally honest truth about the Falmer shatters that comfort completely. They don't just kill, they capture. And they don't just capture for food, they capture for sport, for slavery, and for a calculated sadism that proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that there is still a mind working behind those blind eyes. A mind that understands pain and enjoys inflicting it. If you have ever cleared out a Falmer hive, really looked at the environment, you've seen the evidence. The bloody tables, the shackles, the cages that are just a little too small for a grown Nord to stand up in. This isn't the den of an animal. Animals don't build torture chambers. This is the workshop of a serial killer on a civilization-wide scale. The core in-game fact that anchors this nightmare is found in places like Liar's Retreat, or the darkest corners of Blackreach. In these locations, we don't just find piles of bones, we find fresh bodies. We find bandits who barricaded themselves in thinking they were safe, only to be dragged off one by one. But most horrifyingly, we find the Falmer servants. In Blackreach, you will occasionally encounter NPCs labelled simply as Falmer Servant. These are Nords, Bretons, or Imperials. They aren't dead, they aren't vampires. They are living, breathing people who wander the Falmer camps freely. But here is the kicker. They don't attack the Falmer, they attack you. Think about the psychological breaking point required to achieve that. The Falmer have taken these surface dwellers, dragged them into the pitch-black depths, and tortured them so thoroughly that they have switched sides. This isn't just magic, this is Stockholm Syndrome weaponized through trauma. These servants have likely been fed the same toxic fungus, or perhaps beaten into submission until their only hope of survival was to serve the monsters. It implies a sophisticated understanding of psychology. The Falmer know how to break a mind without killing the body. This behaviour mimics the exact trauma inflicted upon the Snow Elves by the Dwemer. It's a generational cycle of abuse looping forever in the dark. The Dwemer enslaved the Snow Elves, stripped them of their will, and made them servants. Now, the Falmer are doing the exact same thing to the surface races. They are reenacting their own history, but this time they are the masters holding the whip. It's not just cruelty, it's a twisted form of heritage. The calculated sadism is also evident in how they treat those they don't keep as servants. We need to talk about the pantry. In many Falmer dungeons, you will find small, dead-end alcoves blocked by gates. Inside, you find a bedroll, maybe a bucket, and a prisoner. Sometimes the prisoner is dead, sometimes they are alive and beg you to release them. But look at the inventory of the dead ones. They often have nothing. They were stripped, caged, and kept alive. Why? The obscure lore tidbit here comes from environmental storytelling and cut content discussions. It is heavily implied that the Falmer keep captives alive to ensure the meat stays fresh. They don't have refrigeration. If they kill a bandit raid party all at once, the meat rots. So they cage them. They feed them just enough to keep the heart beating. They harvest them one by one. It is the logic of a butcher, applied to sentient beings, but it gets darker. There are theories in the lore community that the Falmer also use captives for bloodletting, to feed the Chaurus, or to harvest ingredients for their poisons. We know Falmer weapons are coated in virulent toxins. While much of this comes from Chaurus, some alchemy recipes require blood. The prisoners are essentially juice boxes. There is a particularly haunting moment in the Dawnguard questline when you find a torture rack in a Falmer area. It's not a Dwemer rack, it's made of chitin and leather. It was built by the Falmer. Why does a blind creature need a torture rack? They can't see the fear in the victim's eyes. This suggests they derive satisfaction from the sounds of pain. The screams, the begging, the breaking of bones. This is the music of their culture. It validates their power. In a world of silence and clicking, a scream is a symphony of dominance. This cruelty separates the Falmer from every other enemy faction in Skyrim. Bandits want your gold, Forsworn want their land, vampires want to rule. The Falmer just want you to suffer. They are the embodiment of pure malice. They are what happens when you strip away civilization but leave the intelligence intact. You get a creature that is smart enough to build a trap, but lacks the moral compass to feel bad about using it. There is a community debate regarding the intelligence of the Falmer based on this sadism. Some argue that this cruelty proves they are returning to intelligence, that they are evolving back into a state where they can plan and conceptualize abstract ideas like punishment. Others argue it proves they are irredeemable demons. If they're smart enough to enslave a Nord, they are smart enough to know it's wrong, and they do it anyway. It kills the innocent victim narrative. They aren't just tragic fallen elves anymore, they are active perpetrators of evil. Let's also consider the Lighthouse incident, Frostflow Lighthouse. If you know, you know. If you don't, it's one of the most tragic unmarked quests in the game. A Redguard family moves into a lighthouse to start a new life. They hear scratching in the basement. Then the Falmer break in. They don't just kill the family, they drag them down. They take the father first. The journals you find detail the slow, agonizing dismantling of the family unit. The Falmer didn't rush. They took their time. They isolated the victims. They killed the mother. They dragged the siblings away. The final confrontation is in the depths of the cave, where you find the father's skull inside the belly of a Chaurus Reaper. The Falmer fed him to their pet. This wasn't a territorial dispute. This was a home invasion followed by ritualistic slaughter. The Falmer sought them out. They surfaced, found a happy family, and dragged them into hell. This incident proves that the Falmer are proactive. They aren't just lurking in holes waiting for you to fall in. They are coming up, they are testing the doors, they are looking for new toys. We must also acknowledge the role of looting. Falmer love to loot. We find piles of stolen goods in their hives, shiny armor, books, which they can't read, silverware. Why? They can't use half of it. It's a cargo cult mentality. They hoard the trappings of the surface world perhaps because they remember, in their genetic memory, that these things signify wealth or power. Or maybe they just like the texture of silver, but the fact that they strip their prisoners naked suggests a desire to humiliate. You come here with your steel and your fire, and we will leave you as nothing but meat. The calculated sadism of the Falmer is the final nail in the coffin of any diplomatic solution. You cannot negotiate with a being that sees you as a renewable resource of meat and screams. You cannot reason with a culture that builds its walls out of the skins of its victims, and yet, despite this barbarism, there is a flicker of the arcane in their midst. They aren't just butchers. Among the torturers and the warmongers, there are those who still remember how to touch the fabric of magic. They are blind, they are mad, but they can still call down the blizzard. And this leads us to the terrifying reality of their spiritual leaders, the shamans who prove that while the snow elves lost their eyes, they never lost their power. You're creeping through the dark, your torch doused to avoid detection. You've bypassed the traps, silenced the Chaurus, and you think you have the tactical advantage. Then, from the blackness across the cavern, you hear a sound that makes your blood run cold. It's not a click, it's not a hiss. It's the humming vibration of the air itself being violently rearranged. A split second later, a jagged spear of ice slams into your chest, freezing your stamina instantly. You look up, and there, standing on a ledge you didn't even see, is a figure wreathed in a pale, cold aura. The Falmer haven't just kept their teeth, they've kept their magic. The 12th brutally honest truth about the betrayed is that despite the blindness, the torture, and the devolution, they have retained a mastery of the arcane that rivals the College of Winterhold. They are not just savages, they are savants of the cold. The existence of the Falmer Shaman and higher-tier spellcasters like the Night Prowler or Shadow Master is the single most dangerous variable in any Deep Earth engagement. These aren't just archers who learned a cantrip, these are dedicated spellcasters who can dual-cast destruction magic, heal their allies, and summon Atronachs. The core in-game fact here is their elemental preference. While you might occasionally see a Falmer use sparks or poison spells, their bread and butter is frost magic. Frostbite, Ice Spike, Ice Storm, Wall of Frost. This isn't a random coincidence. This is muscle memory. The Snow Elves were children of the North. They were attuned to the cold. Even after thousands of years in the steam-heated depths of Dwemer ruins, their souls still reach for the ice. It's a tragic biological imperative. They are creatures of the deep trying to recreate the freezing winds of the surface they can no longer remember. But how do they do it? Magic in Skyrim usually requires study. You read spell tomes, you decipher runes, you attend lectures by Tolfdir. The Falmer can't read, they can't see runes. This implies that their magic is entirely oral and instinctual. It's passed down through the shamans, likely through clicking chants and vibrational tones. It represents a shift from academic magic, the wizard, to primal magic, the sorcerer. They don't learn the spell, they feel the spell. This leads to a community debate that has raged on forums for years. How do they aim? If you play a stealth character, you know the frustration. You can be invisible, muffled, and standing 50 feet away, but the moment a Falmer shaman aggrows, they seem to know exactly where you are. The prevailing theory is that their magic isn't just a weapon, it's a sensory organ. Magicka radiates. A mage, like the Dragonborn, is a beacon of energy. The Falmer shamans might perceive the world not through light, but through the ebb and flow of Magicka currents. To them, you aren't a visual blur, you're a burning torch of soul energy. This makes them the ultimate anti-mage hunters. You can hide your body, but you can't hide your aura. Let's look at their tools. The Falmer staff is a grotesque masterpiece. Unlike the wooden staves of the surface, which are elegant and polished, a Falmer staff is made of, you guessed it, chitin and bone. But look closer at the design. It often looks like a spinal column or a withered limb. An obscure lore tidbit suggests that these staves aren't just conduits, they are harvested from the dead. Some theories propose that the Falmer used the bones of their own powerful dead shamans to craft these weapons, believing that the magical power resides in the marrow. You aren't just fighting a Falmer with a stick, you're fighting a Falmer wielding his grandfather's femur, which is still twitching with cryomantic energy. The power of the shaman also hints at a social hierarchy we rarely credit them for. In many tribal societies, the shaman is the keeper of law and the advisor to the chief. In Falmer society, the shaman likely serves as the bridge between the physical world of the Chaurus and the spiritual void they inhabit. They are the ones who likely brew the poisons, bless the eggs, and perhaps conduct the rituals that turn captives into servants. We also see them using restoration magic. This is pivotal. They heal each other. A bandit might drink a potion, but a Falmer shaman will cast healing hands on a wounded Chaurus or a fellow warrior. This displays a level of altruism and social cohesion that contradicts the mindless monster narrative. They care about the survival of the hive. They use their precious Magicka reserves not just to kill you, but to save their kin. It's a twisted reflection of the camaraderie found in the Companions or the Legion. And let's talk about the summoning. Falmer shamans don't usually summon Dwemer lords, thankfully, but they do summon Frost Atronachs. Think about the implications of this. To summon a Daedra, you need to tear a hole in the veil between Nirn and Oblivion. You need to impose your will on an extraplanar entity. A Falmer, crouching in the dark eating bugs, has the willpower to command a golem of living ice from a different dimension. This suggests their connection to the planes of Oblivion is surprisingly intact. There is a fan theory that the Falmer's connection to Frost Atronachs is actually a corrupted form of their ancient worship. The Snow Elves might have revered elemental spirits of winter. The Falmer, in their degradation, have twisted this reverence into domination. They don't pray to the winter anymore, they enslave it, just as they were enslaved. The visual design of the shaman is also distinct. They often wear different armour, lighter, more ornate, sometimes adorned with feathers or strange fetishes. In a society of clones, they are individuals. This suggests that magic is the one path to identity left for them. If you can wield the frost, you get to be someone. But the horror of their magic is best summarised by the spell Ice Storm. It's a slow-moving whirlwind of freezing air that passes through walls and enemies alike. It fills the room. In the tight corridors of a Dwemer ruin, it is unavoidable. It is a spell designed for claustrophobic murder. It doesn't need to be aimed precisely, it just needs to be released. it turns the environment itself into a weapon. This mirrors their philosophy. The environment is harsh, so we will be harsher. Furthermore, we must consider the source of their magicka. Underground, far from the sun, which is the hole to Aetherius, magicka should theoretically be harder to regenerate, yet they are potent. Some lore scholars speculate that the Falmer have tapped into the deep magic or the tones of the earth, similar to the Dwemer but more primal. Or perhaps the glowing mushrooms and geodes of Blackreach act as natural soul gems, radiating energy that the Falmer soak up like sponges. They have adapted to an ecosystem of subterranean mana. The shamanistic mastery also serves as a warning for the future. If they are still teaching each other spells, if they are still crafting staves, it means they are capable of learning. They aren't stagnant. A Falmer shaman today might know a spell that a Falmer shaman 500 years ago didn't. They are iterating. And if they ever figure out how to cast invisibility or paralyze on a mass scale, Skyrim is doomed. Finally, there is a haunting beauty to their magic. In the pitch black of a cave, the blue glow of a Falmer casting a spell is often the only light you see. It illuminates their twisted faces, their milky eyes, their jagged armour. For a brief second, bathed in the light of their own creation, they look almost elven again. The magic reveals the silhouette of the noble race they used to be, before the spell releases and the ice shatters your ribs. But while the shamans wield the cold of the living world, there are other entities in Skyrim, ghostly, mournful and deadly, that wield the cold of the grave. And a growing body of evidence suggests that these spirits, these pale ladies, are not just random hauntings. They might be the lost mothers of the Falmer race, waiting for children who will never come home. In the lexicon of Skyrim's horrors, there is a distinct divide between the ugly and the beautiful. On one side, you have the trolls, the hagravens, and the Falmer, creatures of dirt, blood, and bone. On the other side, you have something far more ethereal, something that kills you not with a rusty axe, but with a caress of absolute zero. You see them hovering over the marshes of Yarmarch, or drifting through the ruins of Labyrinthian. They are the Wisp Mothers. And the 13th brutally honest truth about the Falmer is that these spectral nightmares might be their mothers. This is one of the most haunting theories in the entire Elder Scrolls canon, and once you see the evidence, you can never unsee it. The theory posits that the Wisp Mothers are not just random elemental spirits or lich queens. They are the ghosts of the snow elf women who died during the initial genocide, or perhaps those who refused the Dwemer's Pact and chose to perish in the cold rather than submit to the dark. Let's look at the visual evidence, the core in-game fact that stares you right in the face. If you stop panic-firing arrows for a second and actually look at a Wisp Mother, what do you see? You see a tall, slender, humanoid female figure. She has pale, almost blue-white skin. She floats, but look closer at the face. The angular features, the high cheekbones, and most damning of all, the pointed ears. The model geometry is undeniably Mer. She isn't a human ghost. She isn't a nature sprite like a Spriggan. She is an elf, and she's wearing tattered ancient rags that look suspiciously like the decomposed remnants of fine elven silk. She wields frost magic with the same innate mastery as the Falmer shamans we just discussed. But hers is purer, more refined. It is the magic of the snow elves before the corruption. The most famous encounter with this entity is, of course, the quest the Pale Lady in Frostmere Crypt. Here you find a sword, the Pale Blade, which is clearly of ancient Akaviri or perhaps even older design, but the entity bound to it is a Wisp Mother named the Pale Lady. The bandits in the crypt are terrified of her. She has been driving them mad, stealing their minds, but it's the obscure lore tidbit found in the book The Wisp Mother that gives this theory legs. The in-game text offers several hypotheses. Some say they are lich queens of the First Era. Some say they are elemental manifestations of Nirn itself. But one theory explicitly suggests they are the last remnants of the Snow Elves, spirits who clung to the world out of grief or vengeance. The text describes them as luring travellers to their doom, often seeking to steal children or life force. Why children? This is where the tragedy becomes unbearable. If the Wisp Mothers are indeed the spirits of Snow Elf mothers, their obsession with children, and the wisps that surround them, takes on a horrifying context. They lost an entire generation. They saw their children slaughtered by Ysgramor's 500 companions. They saw their surviving children march into the Dwemer ruins to be blinded and enslaved. The wisps that float around them, are they the souls of those lost children? Are they fragments of the mother's own shattered psyche? Or are they just magicka manifestations that the grieving spirit treats like children? When you fight a Wisp Mother, she spawns shades, clones of herself. She's trying to rebuild a family, a clan, a court, out of ice and memory. She's terrified of being alone in the whiteout. There is a fan community debate regarding the geography of Wisp Mothers. We tend to find them in high, snowy places or ancient ruins, like Labyrinthian, which dates back to the Dragon Cult era, overlapping with the Snow Elf decline. You rarely find them in the south. They stick to the old territories of the Snow Elves. They are haunting their own graveyards. But the real horror lies in the juxtaposition. Imagine a Falmer crawling out of a cave mouth at twilight. He is blind, hunched, clicking, covered in Chaurus slime. He senses a presence. Floating above him is a Wisp Mother. She's beautiful, radiant, and silent. He cannot see her. She, likely trapped in a loop of spectral madness, may not recognize him. Or worse, perhaps she does. Perhaps the Wisp Mothers attack the living because they look at the Falmer, their own descendants, and see what they have become. Maybe the rage of the Wisp Mother isn't just generic undead hatred. Maybe it's the fury of a mother who sees that her sacrifice was in vain. "We died so you could live," the ghost might scream in the language of the wind, "and you became this?" The Wisp Mother as Snow Elf theory also explains their rarity. There are thousands of Draugr because there were thousands of ancient Nords. There are millions of Falmer because they breed. But Wisp Mothers are rare boss encounters. This fits the narrative of a genocide. These are the few, the powerful, the matriarchs who had enough magical will to refuse the afterlife. They are the spectral resistance fighting a war that ended 4,000 years ago. Consider their loot: Wisp Mother wrappings, glow dust. Ingredients used for invisibility and regeneration. They are comprised of the very essence of fading away and returning. It's poetic. They are trying to fade from a world that hurts them, yet they are constantly regenerating their grief. We also have to talk about the Pale Lady sword enchantment. Fear and frost. It strikes terror into enemies. This aligns with the Snow Elf history, the terror of the Night of Tears, the flight from the Nords. The blade remembers the fear of its creators, and let's look at the mechanics of the fight. The Wisp Mother hovers. She keeps her distance. She's aloof. The Falmer rushes you. He is feral. This contrast perfectly encapsulates the fall of the race. The ghost represents the High Elf ancestry, magical, distant, superior. The monster represents the betrayed reality, grounded, desperate, violent. They are the two halves of the Snow Elf soul, split apart and given physical form, unable to ever reunite. There is also a theory that the Wisp Mothers are actually the source of the legend of the Nereid or water spirits in other cultures, but adapted to Skyrim's harsh climate. The Snow Elves worshipped the water. Think of the Ewer and the Chantry. It makes sense that their spirits would take on a fluid elemental form, but because Skyrim is frozen, the water becomes ice. They are frozen nymphs, trapped in the glacier of time. If you ever want to feel the full weight of this tragedy, try luring a Falmer to a Wisp Mother. Difficult but possible with console commands or lucky kiting. They will fight. The mother will destroy the child. The ice will shatter the chitin. It is a civil war of the dead against the damned. The Wisp Mother serves as a reminder that the Snow Elves didn't just vanish into the ground. Some of them went up. They became the mist, the snow, the biting wind. The Nords might claim Skyrim belongs to the Nords, but the weather itself seems to be the vengeful spirit of the Elves. Every blizzard is a scream from the Merethic era. But while the ghosts are stuck in the past, reenacting their trauma in the lonely peaks, the Falmer in the deep are doing something far more concerning. They aren't just surviving anymore. They aren't just defending their holes. Recent reports and gameplay events suggest a terrifying shift in their behaviour. They are testing the boundaries, they are coming closer to the surface. And they aren't just looking for food, they are looking for a way back in. This brings us to the present day, 4th era, year 201. The sleeping giant beneath Skyrim is waking up, and the raids are getting bolder. For thousands of years, the people of Skyrim have lived by a simple, unspoken rule. If you don't go into the deep caves won't bother you. The Nords have always treated the Falmer like a boogeyman, a story to scare children, or a hazard for foolish miners. Stay out of the Dwemer ruins, they say, and you'll be fine. The 14th brutally honest truth is that this rule is no longer valid. The Falmer are no longer content with the scraps of the underground. They are testing the surface, and if you pay attention to the environmental storytelling in Skyrim, you realise that we aren't looking at random attacks. We are looking at the scouting phase of a full-scale invasion. The most chilling example of this, the core in-game fact that proves the containment has failed, is found at Leah's Retreat. On your map, it looks like just another bandit cave. You walk in, expecting to hear the usual "never should have come here" from a Nord in fur armour. Instead, you hear the wet tearing of flesh and the chittering of insects. You walk into a slaughterhouse. The bandits aren't waiting for you. They are dead, and they didn't die days ago. The blood is fresh. The Falmer have burst through the back walls of the cellar, swarming up from the depths to butcher the surface dwellers in their own safe house. This is a pivotal shift in behaviour. Usually Falmer defend their territory. In Leah's Retreat, they are expanding it. They broke into us a human settlement, albeit a criminal one. They breached a wall that separated the Underdark from Skyrim. The bandits, who are usually the predators, were reduced to prey in a matter of minutes. This isn't an isolated incident. Look at the map. Falmer are appearing in caves that have no direct connection to Dwemer ruins. They are showing up in Red Eagle Redoubt. They are infesting Shimmermist Cave, just a stone's throw from Whiterun. They are creeping closer to the cities. In the Dawnguard expansion, we even see them surfacing in the Forgotten Vale, actively besieging the surface temples. There is an obscure lore tidbit that suggests this aggression is timed. The Nords are currently distracted by the civil war. The Legion and the Stormcloaks are bleeding each other dry, leaving the roads and the wilderness patrols thinner than they have been in centuries. It is highly probable that the Falmer, with their hypersensitive hearing, can literally hear the war above. They can hear the marching boots, the shouting, the chaos. They know the surface is weak. This leads to a terrifying community debate. Are the Falmer overpopulated? We know they breed rapidly. We know they have a stable food source in the Chaurus. Blackreach is massive, but it is finite. The invasion theory posits that the Falmer are pushing up simply because they have run out of room down. They are spilling over the rim of the cup. If this is true, what we're seeing isn't a raid, it's a migration. Imagine the horror of a Falmer night. The sun sets. The citizens of Morthal or Dawnstar lock their doors, afraid of vampires. But instead of a bat, they hear the clicking of hundreds of Chaurus claws on the cobblestones. They smell the ammonia stench of the hive. The Falmer don't need siege engines, they can scale walls. They don't need light, they fight better in the dark. A coordinated Falmer attack on a surface town would be a massacre that makes the dragon attacks look like a mild inconvenience. The game hints at this boldness in the random encounters. If you are high enough level and you travel the roads at night near a cave entrance, you can be ambushed by a Falmer raiding party. On the road, under the stars. This is a massive violation of their biological imperative. They hate the light, yes, but they are learning that the night belongs to them too. We also have to consider the surface raids for captives. We discussed the sadism earlier, but the logistics are terrifying. To drag a family from a lighthouse or a bandit from a cave back down to Blackreach requires a supply line. It requires path finding. It requires a level of organisation that suggests they are mapping the routes to the surface. They are building a highway system for kidnapping. The tragedy of the Nords is that they are completely oblivious. General Tullius is worried about Ulfric. Ulfric is worried about the Elves of the Dominion. Neither of them realises that the actual Elves, the ones with the poison and the chitin, are digging tunnels under their forts. The civil war is essentially two people fighting over the deed to a house while the basement is on fire. There is also a theory that the return of the dragons has stirred them up. The dragons are shouting. The ground is shaking. Maybe the Falmer are agitated by the tonal disturbances. Or maybe, just maybe, they remember the dragons. The Snow Elves fought dragons in the Merethic era. Perhaps the return of their ancient enemy has triggered a genetic call to arms, forcing them up to face the threat, or to capitalise on the chaos the dragons create. The breach at Leah's Retreat serves as a microcosm for the future of Skyrim. The long hammer, a unique weapon found next to the corpse of the bandit leader there, tells a story. The owner tried to fight back. He had a good weapon. He was a tough Nord. It didn't matter. The swarm was too fast, too vicious, and too quiet. This testing of the surface is the build-up to a horror movie that hasn't started yet. The Falmer are poking the bear. They are killing the bandits to see if the Jarls notice. They are taking the lighthouse keepers to see if the guards come looking, and when they realise that no one is coming, that the surface world is fractured, leaderless, and blind to the threat below, they will stop testing, and they will start swarming. But the most terrifying thing isn't just their numbers or their aggression, it's what's happening inside their heads. Because as they breach the surface, they aren't just acting on instinct, they are displaying signs of something that should be impossible for a devolved race. They are getting smarter, and that brings us to the final and most dangerous truth of all. We have reached the end of our descent, Lawmasters. We have traced the Snow Elves from the sunlit tragedy of the Mosring to the fungal nightmare of Blackreach. We have seen their blindness, their torture, and their rage. But the 15th and final brutally honest truth about the Falmer is the one that should keep you awake at night. It is the realization that the Falmer are not a dying race. They aren't a remnant of the past fading into obscurity. They are the future. The Falmer are getting smarter. For centuries, scholars dismissed them as goblins or animals. But those scholars were looking at a snapshot. If you look at the motion picture of history, the Falmer are on an upward trajectory. They hit rock bottom in the First Era, and they have been climbing back up the evolutionary ladder ever since. They are recovering, they are organising, and they are evolving into a civilization that is harder, crueler, and more resilient than anything the surface world can produce. The core in-game fact that validates this terrifying potential comes from the most reliable source in Skyrim, Urag Groshub, the Orc librarian of the College of Winterhold. If you ask him about the Falmer, he doesn't dismiss them, he warns you. He explicitly states that while they appear primitive, they are showing signs of rising intelligence. He mentions that their raids are becoming more coordinated and that they are seeking out books and magical texts. They can't read them yet, or so we think, but they recognise the value of knowledge. They are hoarding data. This isn't the behaviour of a beast. A wolf doesn't steal a book. A troll doesn't stockpile scrolls. This is the behaviour of a culture trying to remember itself. It suggests that the hive mind is beginning to ask questions. They are trying to reverse engineer the civilization they lost. We see this evolution in their gear hierarchy. A standard Falmer wears chitin scraps. A Falmer warmonger wears heavy articulated armour that rivals orcish or ebony craftsmanship. This isn't scavenged, it is forged. They have relearned the art of smithing without fire, using biological resins and hardening techniques we don't even understand. They have moved from the Stone Age to the Iron Age, or Chitin Age, in the dark. There is an obscure lore tidbit hidden in the developer commentary and deep lore discussions surrounding the Geonoth, a creature from Dawnstar mobile game, and the Falmer. It suggests that the Falmer's high reproduction rate combined with the harsh pressures of the underground is forcing a hyper-evolution. They are adapting faster than men or mer. They are becoming the ultimate survivors. While the Nords are getting weaker, struggling with civil wars and Thalmor bans, the Falmer are getting stronger. And let's look at the magic again. We discussed the shamans, but consider the implications of the night prowlers and shadow masters. These are classes based on stealth and tactical superiority. They have developed a military doctrine. They use invisibility, they use ambushes. They are professional soldiers. If they ever unite under a single leader, a new Snow Prince, born of the dark, they would be unstoppable. The community debate here is chilling. What happens next? Many fans believe that the next great threat to Tamriel isn't the Thalmor or the return of Alduin. It is the rise of the Falmer. Imagine a scenario where they figure out how to cure the blindness. Or worse, imagine they decide they don't need to see. Imagine they develop a form of tonal magic that allows them to collapse the cities of men from below. Whiterun sits on a plain. Solitude sits on an arch. Windhelm is stone. The Falmer are sappers. They could sink the surface world into the dark. Knight-Paladin Gelabor holds on to hope. He believes his people can be saved. He hopes to communicate with them. But the brutally honest truth is that the Snow Elf is dead. The Falmer is what remains, and the Falmer doesn't want to be saved. It wants to conquer. It has learned the lesson the Dwemer taught it well. The strong enslave the weak. And right now, the surface world is looking very, very weak. So when you kill a Falmer, know that you aren't just culling a monster. You're fighting a war against a rising superpower. You're the only thing standing between the sunlit world and a new age of darkness. The betrayed are done being victims. They are ready to become the masters, And that, my friends, is the reality of the Falmer. They are the mirror that Skyrim is afraid to look into. They are the proof that civilization is fragile, that the gods can fail you, and that in the end, the dark always finds a way to survive. And so, we leave the Blackreach caverns behind. We step away from the clicking of the Chaurus and the hiss of the steam pipes. We climb the long, winding stairs, past the dwarven centurions that stand silent guard over empty halls, and we push open the heavy bronze lift gates. Take a deep breath. Can you imagine the air? It's cold, crisp, and smells of pine needles and snow. The sky above is vast and open, painted with the ribbons of the Aurora Borealis, Kind's lights dancing in silence. There are no ceilings here, no crushing weight of rock, just the infinite, peaceful night. The Falmer are far below us now. They are deep in the earth, doing what they must to survive in their world. But you are here, in the safety of the surface. You are in your own sanctuary. The monsters we talked about tonight are locked away behind miles of stone and centuries of history. They cannot reach you. Let the story of the Snow Elves be a reminder to cherish the light, but let it also drift away now, like mist rolling off the throat of the world. The history is written, the battles are fought, and the ruins are quiet. Feel the weight of your own blankets. Listen to the hum of the fan, or the wind outside your window. It's a gentle sound, isn't it? Not a click, not a scream. Just the steady rhythm of the world turning safely through the night. You've adventured enough for one day. You've faced the horrors of the deep and come out the other side unscathed. Now it is time to rest your eyes, to let the magicka recharge, and to drift into a sleep as deep and untroubled as the sea of ghosts is wide. Sweet dreams.